Thank you all for coming today to watch. Today's topic of the stream and the vlog that I will upload is high-speed rail on the Northeast Corridor. Now, I do want to tell people this is going to get uploaded. Last week's video I did not upload because I ran out of disk space while writing it, unfortunately, and this means that uh, instead of being able to just upload it and refer people to it, I was talking about these different national traditions of building high-speed rail. And being able, instead of being able to just upload the video for posterity for YouTube, for people to rummage through a 2-hour video, I instead rewrote it as a blog post, and I think it actually came out okay. Uh, okay. Why are electric locomotives so popular here versus EMUs? Um, what do you mean? Um, so German high-speed rail is predominantly EMU. The ICE3 is EMU. The export versions, that is the Velaro, uh, they're all EMUs. Spain only gets Spain at this point is buying only EMUs or Talgos, where the Talgos tilt, and Talgo also has this really fancy thing they're doing right now, where the European loading gauge is defined on a curve, and this means that the the maximum width of a European train is technically 3 meters 15, but it's 3 meters 15 on a curve, and this means that if you have a normal sized car, then the width has to shrink to fit in the curve. In practice, it's a little less than 3 meters. Maybe I think it's maybe 290 is the norm. So it's four abreast. Talgo uses these really short cars they don't even have bogies. They have just one wheel between one pair of wheels between each cars, and the cars are very short, so they figured they can widen the train a little bit. So they have five abreast seating. I've never seen that myself, but it is very um, uncomfortable, I imagine, just knowing what the seat widths have to be. Um, and so the and so the tilt system requires them to be locomotives, and they think that the extra width gives them sufficient seating capacity compared with a Velaro. In reality, by the way, the Velaro is one of the highest capacity European trains. It's I think 450-ish per 8-car train, um, which I don't think any Talgo gets. Maybe the five abreast Talgos got them, but the normal four abreast ones are I think 300 something. It's like single level TGVs. Like the only mass locomotive hold um the only massive locomotive hold high speed rail here is the TGVs, where they just really like their bi-level TGVs. France is very obstinate about learning from other places, especially when it comes to things that it considers as part of its national prestige. So the TGVs are kind of like the piece of rolling stock in France that is in the least amount of dialogue with the technology in the rest of Europe. Um, oh yeah, the TGV specifically, yeah, that's because France, first of all, is kind of bad at listening. Second of all, especially when it's considered its national prestige, the TGV. Um, it's a little bit like telling the United States that it should listen to Germany in military matters. Um, and I don't mean like in the 1940s. I mean today, when Germany has something resembling an army, but not really a modern army for a country this size and this wealth. So in the same way, France thinks that the TGV is kind of like the crowning jewel of French state technology. So it's kind of evolving. So it's kind of so it's evolving kind of independently from things in the rest of Europe. Again, this is something very specific to a tradition that considers itself very successful to the point that it doesn't think it needs to listen to other people. Um, like as soon as I understand that this idea that the Americans will just never listen to Europeans, um, the um, the problems that are in Europe that are kind of parallel in some cases are very evident. Um, because Hulu, you mean where? Oh, you mean when it was push pull, like when the locomotive was at the back and not the front? Yeah, in the United States. So in the United States, there's actually a rule that I think was repealed recently, but at least in the 1990s, the FRA um, required a speed limit for push pull, I believe 110 miles an hour. So the Northeast corridor is not push pull. Even the regional, so the Northeast corridor for people, so which is what we're actually going to talk about before people start asking questions. The Northeast corridor is very roughly the line that I'm highlighting in red. I say very roughly because this is already with some bypasses that I'm going to go over and why and various trade-offs involved in them. So maybe not so much in Connecticut, but most of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, most of Jersey, and so on. This is the route as is. So this is the route between Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington. It benefits from these cities' collinearity. In fact, so here's a really cool fact about the Northeast. So I'm going to draw a straight line on Google Earth, and I'm going to actually be a little fussy and start it from South Station, Boston, um, to Union Station in DC. Um, and here's a really cool thing about it. So this line that we're drawing between the train station, we need to actually click, between the train stations of Boston and Washington. This line does not actually pass through Baltimore. It passes close to Baltimore, but not through it. I believe the boundary is the bridge in the water, but I'm basing this on half-remembered things from the second season of The Wire. But this line does actually pass through the city limits of Philadelphia, not through Center City, which is here, but quite close to the train station, and still through city limits. And likewise in New York, it not only passes through city limits, but it even passes to some extent through the limits of Manhattan, um, and again, very close to Penn Station. Uh, I do not know whether this is within the city limits of New Haven. I don't think it matters terribly. So the point is that these cities are very collinear, and this is rather Shinkansen-like, in that one line gets so much traffic. Um, and Yeah, so anyway, my point is that this line, because the maximum speed, even on the regionals, is 125 miles an hour. Not obviously not on almost the line. The line would be so much faster if trains went 200 kilometers an hour most of the way. They don't. But the trains, but that is the maximum speed of the trains, so they're required to be hauled by a power car. Um, this is not. It's not like an original thing. So in the 19, so a little bit of history. So the first high-speed line in the world is the Shinkansen in Japan. It opens in 1964 with an average speed of 120 something kilometers an hour. It gets you from Tokyo to Shin, Osaka in 4 hours. Within a year, the express trains open, the Hikari. They do the trip in, I believe, 310. So this is an average speed of about 170. Now, the United States, I don't know if inspired by that or by internal improvements, uh, passes something called the High Speed Ground Transportation Act under LBJ. And this leads to something called the Metroliner, which is between New York and Washington, right around when the Pennsylvania Railroad, which runs this line, and the New York Central, which does not run this line. This is the New Haven Railroad, which was added to Penn Central, but New York Central is New York up to Albany. So Metro North, most of it was New York Central. Well, not the New Haven line, but the others were New York Central. And then from Albany, it would go roughly along this route. It was called the water level route because it's the Erie Canal roughly. Then along the lake, then to Chicago. So it was the Pennsylvania Railroad. I mean, the main passenger railways went New York, Philly, Chicago. Not New York, Philly, Chicago. New York, Philly, D.C. But these were mostly freight railroads. Um, the passenger trains had a lot of prestige, but the main moneymaker was freight, and the freight for these eastern railways was to connect the East Coast with the Midwest, predominantly Chicago. So the Pennsylvania went through the interior of Pennsylvania, crossing the mountains. The New York Central went like this in a longer route, but a flatter one. So their prestige trains to Chicago actually took the same amount of time as those of the Pennsylvania Railroad from New York. There are a few more that never hit New York, things, and therefore, and maybe weren't as passenger rail centric. Things like the Baltimore and Ohio, which kind of became the northern core of CSX. So the point is that the Pennsylvania and the North Central were the two biggest railways in early and mid 20th century America. They merge in, I believe, 69, and basically, and then add the New Haven Railway, which is class one, but it's not one of the main railways. It's a big passenger railway. It might actually be the second biggest passenger railway in America after the Pennsylvania. But it wasn't a big freight railway; it just had a monopoly in most of New England, in southern New England rather. And then that entire edifice went bankrupt, and Amtrak was formed on the carcasses of its passenger operations, and Conrail on the carcasses of its and several other railways in the Northeast, several other freight railways, and then in the 90s, with much higher freight rates, much lower operating costs, Conrail became profitable, so they immediately privatized it. Privatization is really great. So that's kind of the history, and so these were Metroliners, the New York to Washington trains that were passed by this act in the late 60s. I believe the trip times were, at least on paper, in some cases better than today. The maximum speed was 200 kilometers an hour. They were initially held by EMUs, actually. So it was legal. It was just, I think later, maybe in the 90s, the FRA started complaining and required a, a locomotive to lead rather than a cab car. So that would be a normal passenger, an unpowered passenger car where the front end has a cab for a driver who then remotely controls the locomotive in the back. Um, so this is something that, again, also exists very I think it might actually exist more in America than Europe right now. I know it's a thing in Switzerland. Switzerland still has unpowered cars and locomotives, but they're transitioning to all EMU. It's just recent. Oh, were the express trains original plans on the Shinkansen? Yes. This is why the intermediate stops in the Shinkansen have 4 tracks, so that they could do overtakes. Um, so anyway, this is the history of the Northeast Corridor. Um, I believe the trip time was 257, but in the 70s they were sometimes doing like 230 something, 240 something, but I don't think it was ever reliable 230 something, 240 something. It was something the trains could do, but something important about the Americans is that they never actually have really reliable timetabling. They're never in the position of saying, okay, we're going to do regular nighttime maintenance, um, and then during the day there's no maintenance, trains run. So it was never this organized, and the result is that there will always be minor things like a daytime work order, and then there's something called flagging, which means that trains have to slow down adjacent to a work zone. Um, so something would always come up. So I don't think they were ever reliably, let's say, 235 New York to DC. Um, my understanding is that the reliable timetable is only 257. This was with EMUs that were not very popular. Just it's not that passengers didn't like them or anything. It's just that they happen to be unreliable trains, and because the American response, not just the American response, the corporate response, let's call it, to every every combination of failure and innovation is to never innovate again until the company goes bankrupt and and its carcasses get acquired by companies that did innovate and move forward. Um, so the EMU was an innovation. That particular EMU was maybe high maintenance, so they decided EMUs are bad and went back to locomotives. And sometimes even trains even on Amtrak even run push pull. The Keystones they do New York, Philly, and then change direction, Philly to Harrisburg. Um, they sometimes run cab car leading. I think even on the Northeast Corridor they might sometimes run cab car leading and not Philly to Harrisburg. I'm not sure. Um, but but it's certainly very common for them to run locomotive leading New York Philly and then cab car leading Philly to Harrisburg. So it's a thing that's done. It's just I believe it is not allowed to be done in America, or at least traditionally. And by traditionally, I really just mean 1990s and 2000s. Um, at above 110 miles an hour. Um, but again, I don't want to kind of talk about top speeds very much. Because remember, what is the top speed today between New York and Washington? The answer is 135 miles an hour. The trains can do more, but the catenary is something called variable tension. And I'm going to talk about these systemic things, so things like maintenance, turnouts. I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Variable tension catenary. Um, because the top speed matters, but less than people think. Um, so the maximum speed between New York and Washington is 135 miles an hour. So for people who um, know metric, this is 217 kilometers an hour. And the speed is actually achieved for decent chunks of the trip. This is the speed in pretty big chunks of New Jersey, I believe. See kind of this curviness. If you zoom in sufficiently, you see that my red line doesn't quite follow the tracks because I think these curves need to be straightened a little bit. But I believe that once the trains cross this river, so from New Brunswick south, they go 135 miles an hour until somewhere in suburban Pennsylvania. I'm not sure whether there's any of that between Philly and Wilmington, but I know it does exist between Wilmington and Baltimore and between Baltimore and Washington. So it's not like a speed is only achieved for very short segments. The way that between New York and Boston, technically the maximum speed is 150 miles an hour, but it's barely ever achieved. It's only achieved between here and here. So between Kingston and this curve in East Greenwich in Rhode Island, and roughly between this curve, which is called Boston Stretch, and this curve, which is called the Canton Viaduct in Massachusetts. So it's but and for the and on average, trains between New York and Boston are slower, not faster. Even though in theory the average speed is higher, just because there's so much slowing down in Connecticut. Um, and so yeah, so anyway, the top speed here is 217 kilometers an hour. Now remember, the Shinkansen averaged 170 kilometers an hour on the Hikari in 1965. And at the time, the uh, maximum speed was 210. So the maximum speed between New York and Washington is a few kilometers an hour more than on the original Shinkansen. But the average speed, so right now so I'm not going to look at Amtrak right now, and the reason I'm not going to do so is because Corona timetables are weird, but the trip times between New York and Washington before Corona were on the order of 2 hours 50. Um, the trip times sometimes deteriorate. This is not a purely American thing. This is also visible on, let's say, Berlin, Hamburg. They say that the trains between Berlin and Hamburg can do it in an hour 30, which they could when the line opened, or rather reopened, with Delting trains in the mid 2000s. And they were even capable of doing it in less, not much less, but a little bit less. So that was in theory an average speed of 190 kilometers an hour. That's a 230 kilometer an hour legacy line. But speeds have deteriorated. They never actually worked in maintaining them the way that, for example, the Shinkansen does, or the way that Swiss railways pretty much have to, because if you deteriorate too much, the entire tuck is gone. And so I think at this point it's an hour 40 Berlin to Hamburg, not an hour 30. So again, deterioration is not a purely American problem, unfortunately. It's also something that we see here. It's something that I would see in France. Um, Paris, Marseille trains, I think, were at one point capable of doing 3 hours 3. By the 2010s, it was 3 hours 12. Um, Whereas Japanese times, I know them just because I look them up on Wikipedia from time to time. They don't deteriorate. So this is really important. So don't deteriorate the timetable. Make sure you have nighttime maintenance, which means trains do not run overnight. Um, there are people who are emotionally attached to night trains. Um, I know them. There are people in Europe. It's something people are trying to grow that because Europe basically gave up on big infrastructure projects. So people are trying to talk about a revival of night trains. They're never on high-speed tracks; they're on legacy tracks. Again, there's a lot of romance involved, and some of it comes from the fact that a lot of Green Party activists, Green Party members, have this kind of low-tech mentality of the world in which they should suffer and stay in a compartment with strangers. But the upshot is that um, even though a lot of foamers are going to like it, and a lot of people are going to talk about the golden age of something, night trains are really bad for maintenance. There needs to be a time on which no trains run. Now, if you're Russia, that is not the nighttime. In Russia, the way this works is freight trains run during the night. Passenger trains run during the day, but they only run in the morning and in the afternoon. It's not purely at rush hour, but there's a period in the midday trough between the peaks, a few hours long, on which no trains run, and that's when maintenance happens in Russia. Now, this is really bad because there's always going to be way more traffic demand midday than overnight. So it's the overnight period that should go. This is how it's done in France, Japan. I'm not sure, China. Um, Sometimes Germany, but Germany sometimes likes running freight trains overnight, which complicates maintenance. Um, just so that they can tell various nibbies that they're going to take the freight trains off their uh, surface lines overnight. So please don't do it. Don't run freight trains overnight. Speed up the freight trains. Maybe run the freight trains at like 11 at night or something. These are not lines with a lot of freight usually, so you can squeeze freight into off peak hours that are not quite the night. Um, so you want to do regular nighttime maintenance to avoid deterioration, um, because as I said, it's about 2 hours 50. I think maybe 2 hours 47 sometimes, 2 hours 52. Maybe this was based on timetables when I was riding these trains more regularly, not New York to DC, but New York to Providence often in the early 2010s. But I would also look at New York DC. So I'm gonna pretend that it is 2 hours 48. The reason I'm going to pretend it's 2 hours 48 is that 2 hours 48 is 2.8 on a calculator. It's not going to be a very big difference between that and 252 or 247. So this is a line that is 360 kilometers, and at 2.8, this averages, and this is the Acela, 129 kilometers an hour. Now the regional does it in about 3 hours and a half, and this is also an operational problem. So operationally, Amtrak has this problem where it has worse operations than France and Spain, and worse maximum speeds than Germany. Of course, in general, Germany is the one that's much better at operations, and France and Spain are the one with a much higher top speed and much higher average speed. At a French average speed, which is about 230 kilometers an hour, maybe on the newest lines, 250, 260. This is just happened. Yeah, an hour 34. Um, This is also the speed of the Sanya Shinkansen, so that's Shinosaka to Fukuoka. Um, so again, it's a matter of average speed. It's much more important than top speed because remember, average speed here is about even on the fastest trains is an hour. Sorry, it's not an hour. That's the time. It's 129 kilometers an hour, and on the regionals, which makes somewhat more stops and are priced only as a premium product, whereas an SL is a doubly premium product. Remember, over here, um, on average, the fare revenue on intercity German trains is, I believe, 11 euro cents per passenger kilometer. In France, on the TGV, it's 10. They're operationally profitable. They're paying down. They're paying back capital costs. Not all the trains, but the system at large. So it's about 14, 15 US cents per kilometer. The regional charge is about 30 on average, and the Acela 50 something. So the regional, which is again cheaper at the expense of being slower, I believe that it's about 3.5 hours, maybe slightly better. So an average speed of an hour of about 105 kilometers an hour. Let me just make sure I know math. 103. Okay. So and remember, the Shinkansen did on slightly less average speed, 170 in the 1960s. So this is really a matter not so much of what the top speed is, but of avoiding slowdowns. This is really important. Avoiding slowdowns in station throats. You always want to speed up the slowest segments first. It's kind of hilarious that Amtrak, having heard that the 135 miles an hour speed limit on this comes from the catenary. So the catenary normally is something called constant tension, which means it is designed to have the exact same tension throughout the curve of the catenary, which requires somewhat more advanced engineering to do and more advanced maintenance. And if you don't have the fortitude for that, for example, if you're the United States, which has terrible railway maintenance, you build something called variable tension catenary, which has problems like it sags when the temperature isn't what you expect it to do, what you expect it to be, because the variability of tension always also not always also means variability of thermal expansion. And this leads to further speed limits when it's unusually hot on the Northeast Corridor. Um, but um, but it also requires trains to slow down to 135 miles an hour, even though these lines are fairly straight. These lines, they look very straight. They're sometimes less straight than they seem. So an example is that so this looks very straight, right? Even the curves look very gentle. Um, but if you actually zoom in very closely on this, um, first of all, you might notice that this is not a direct. This is actually a slight S curve. You don't go from this azimuth direct to this one, but it actually starts going a little. It actually starts curving a little bit. Um, a little bit. I'm not gonna know whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise, right? Um, this is clockwise, so a little bit counterclockwise before curving clockwise. Um, so this is going to actually have to be fixed. It's not relevant right now. The current speed limit on this curve is 145, and remember, the miles an hour, not kilometers an hour. And remember, the catenary limits it to 135 um, miles an hour. So this is something that Amtrak is recognizing with its attempt to build constant tension catenary in this segment. The problem is that this is a pond, so technically a wetland. Although I'm pretty sure that if you fix enough of this, and you can just go on the other side of the wetland. Um, but so it's in general, when you see very straight track that is not high-speed track but is legacy track, it's always going to be like this. I mean, you can find examples in the Midwest even more easily because the Midwest has many very flat, very straight lines that are not actually that straight. Um, it's like let's call them mic band straight. I mean, they're actually straight, but from time to time there's someone who turns out to be closeted. So it's the same thing here. It's So this is actually a very blatant example. So straight, 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 really sharp curve, straight, sharp curve, straight. It's lines that are built straight just because it's easier to engineer them this way, but the actual curve radius of these lines are often rather tight. So these lines, if you ever want to build high speed rail out of them, they would need some work, some straightening, and often also often here it also requires grade separation, which is why when I cry on the Midwest, I don't even look at the legacy railways, except in urban areas. Um, but on the Northeast Corridor again, it is. I mean, there are no grade crossings over here, but but there are occasionally these slightly sharper than you'd think curves. Um, so they're building cotton. So they're doing this constant tension catenary project right now between New Brunswick, so here, and Trenton to enable 150 miles an hour, maybe even 165 miles an hour with the new trains, which is what is it, 260, 270? Yes, I'm this petty that I write the entire conversion. 265. Yeah, so this is going to be possibly the world's fastest tilting train that is not a Pendolino. Sorry, that is not a Talgo, even faster than a Pendolino, which stops at 250. So it's actually, there's some kind of impressive engineering there. It's just that the impressive engineering is a technology that's kind of a dead end and involves way too many costs for what it saves. Uh, yeah, and the so the upshot is they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't even get it why it's hundreds of millions of dollars because string wire de novo cost. I mean, I can tell you how much it should cost to string wire de novo New York to DC. This is 360 kilometers of electrification. Now it's quad track electrification, so it's twice the normal cost. So think it's 700. So act like it's 720. Um, this should be about $1 billion, maybe a little bit more. Um, Actually less because all the substations are already there. I mean, maybe they want to change the voltage from 11 kilovolt 25 hertz to 25 kilovolts 60 hertz, and you need more substations because the frequency is higher, which I think is worth it because it means you have smaller transformers on the trains due to the higher frequency, and this means, and I think you're actually are gonna save weight this way and reduce overall operating costs, increase overall speed this way. Very much a second order effect now. But maybe even third order. But I mean, evidently in Germany they have granted with much more of an installed base of 15 kilovolt, 16 2/3 hertz. They've never even tried going to 50 hertz, like in France. So my point is that um, they're spending hundreds of millions, I'm forgetting how many exactly, between just New Brunswick and Trenton, just to be able to say that they're going 150, 165 miles an hour. And here's the thing: they're spending so much money on what is going to be a saving of about a minute and a half. Um, it's about, I think it's supposed to be, I think it's supposed to be 24 miles. So if it's 24 miles, I can just compute it directly in miles and slightly hate myself. 64 seconds without acceleration time. And if you can do 165 miles, 116 seconds score, and this is going to be with considerable acceleration time subtracted out, so maybe, I don't know, 100 seconds, let's say. Um, so they're spending all this money on something that is a rounding error. I mean, something that is a few years worth of scheduled deterioration just because they deferred maintenance and didn't want to say this out loud because this would piss off Congress. Um, and so the uh, and so the top speed, don't get me wrong, it's useful to increase top speed, but top speed is much less important than avoiding slowdowns. Now, I wrote this thing called 30-30-30 is possible. Yeah, this one. 30-30-30 is feasible. I've done some extra work on this since they didn't print. Um, but so this is a plan that Governor Lamont had that was then shot down by trad railroaders who insisted to him that it was not possible, even though it is. But I mean, is he going to believe someone who acts like an American manager or someone who's actually heard of a clock face timetable? Um, so the point here is that this does not actually involve any addition. So this is 30 minutes New York, Stamford, 30 minutes Stamford, New Haven, 30 minutes New Haven, Hartford. So it's an hour New York, New Haven. Today, Metro North is about 2 hours 10 with deterioration, and Amtrak is an hour 40, an hour 45. I think at one point Amtrak was an hour 30, but there's again deterioration on this. Um, Amtrak and Metro North are really terrible with each other. They keep sniping, and they each screw each other. Like Amtrak and the commuter railways in general, they keep playing brinkmanship games, and then they all lose. I mean, the managers win, but the riders all lose. Um, and so the uh, and so over here, between the state line and New Haven, the maximum speed is 75 miles an hour, 120 kilometers an hour. Now, this is a curvy line. It's not a 120 kilometers an hour curvy line. This, again, it's not a good map because here there actually are a lot of curve fixes on this alignment that I drew, but they can still do New York, New Haven in an hour without fixing any of these curves, just running faster on curves that on the current curves, the curve speeds are incredibly conservative, accelerating faster, and avoiding terminal slowdowns. You can save something like 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, just in the last mile into Grand Central. Now, Grand Central is Metro North. It is not Amtrak. Um, Amtrak is Penn Station. Um, there are sometimes plans to have this Alt-G tunnel. So they're trying to build this thing called the Gateway Tunnel, which is roughly like this, and then maybe also do Alt-G, which connects it to Grand Central. But they don't care because it's too much agency turf sharing. Um, but they should build Alt-G, don't get me wrong, but not for Amtrak. Amtrak should keep doing this. Um, if there's way too much suburban traffic, way more than they're planning, or way more intercity traffic than they're planning, they should do this Alt New York North Shell that I'm drawing, but that's just a dedicated Amtrak tunnel that is intended specifically to be minimum urban tunneling. So yeah, a little bit more tunneling in Manhattan, but you use the FDRs as soon as possible because this is a right of way that drivers will get pissed at you, but it's drivers and it's Manhattan. Most people in Manhattan aren't drivers; they can deal with it. They can just dig this. Um, and then yeah, this tunnel is annoying, and then just get faster to the Bronx and avoid dealing with commuter traffic. Um, but at any rate, um, but again, this is like far future. Um, what I'm drawing is something that can be done in the 20s if they care, which I really want to strongly emphasize. They don't care. Um, and by they, I mean Amtrak, community rail agencies, as far as I can tell, basically every politician who ever touches this project. Um, they define themselves by spending, not by trip times, and you see the results. But what they should be doing, again, speed up the slowest segments first. Penn Station, the interlocking, right now the interlocking is 10 miles an hour, maybe 15, and they absolutely can speed it up. This is where turnout design comes into play. The American turnouts are 19th century attack. They are not dead circles. They're not circular. And it's not because they're trying to do some kind of clothoid spirals to ease into a circle. No, there's a sharp angle at some point. Um, so whenever you're in an American turnout, you're thrown side to side. When you're in a German turnout, you don't. You don't get thrown. This is something that this is a very glaring difference. The German turnout tech, also adopted basically everywhere in the world that does not speak English, um, is from the 1920s, not the 1890s. And the result is that they can do 100 millimeters cant efficiency. So, and the American weighs 2 inches, so 50 millimeters. So something about, so here's how cant efficiency works. The formula for circular acceleration is v squared um, so v squared times a equals r right? No, no, the other way around. V squared equals A times R. So um, if you think about this correctly, the units, this matches the units. So we just pick consistent units, let's say meters and seconds. So V has to be meters per second. So for example, um, if you're on a curve of radius 4 kilometers, so 4,000 meters, and lateral acceleration is, let's say, 2 meters per second, then speed is 89 uh, meters per second, which is 322 kilometers an hour. Now, what is so acceleration? So lateral acceleration is always in the horizontal plane, but you can always bank the curves a little bit, like cant them, superelevate them, depending on what word you like using. And the conversion rate is 150 millimeters of superelevation equal 1 meters per second squared of acceleration. Um, Absolute maximum you can hit for superelevation is 200. It's only done on Shinkansen, and European high-speed lines, they top at 180. They could do 200, but they top at 180. And shared lines usually do 150, maybe 160. And then you can always have extra acceleration just by having passengers, but by having the train run faster. Yes, there's going to be centrifugal force, but it's not going to be too much, maybe a meter per second squared. So 150 millimeters is what is called Kant efficiency. They like using the same units as for super elevation. So it's something like 1 point. So it's not like 1 plus 1 or 1 plus 1.2. If the train tilts, you can even hit 180 millimeters. So it's 1.2, and then it's going to be maybe 1.2 plus 1.3 something. So that's maybe 2.5 meters per second squared. Maximum without tilting, for example, you can see in Germany a little bit of 2.08. Kind of more vanilla is maybe 1.67. So 1.67 is vanilla, 2.08 is aggressive. Aggressive with not Pendolino tilt, but Shinkansen tilt or Talgo tilt is maybe 2.4, 2.5. And just to put things in perspective, so it's about 2.5. Now you don't ever have super elevation on a turnout. So it's 1/3 in the American way and 2/3, so 100 millimeters divided by 150 millimeters, the German way. And remember, speed is squared, so it's not twice as fast, but it's square root of 2 times as fast. And you could also do certain stretchings in a few places. Um, Bottom line, this is 100. This is a 15 miles an hour speed limit that probably should be, let's say, 40 something or 50 kilometers an hour. You can save something like you can save, I believe, about a minute on each side of Penn Station just by speeding up the turn and just by speeding up the interlocking. It's just that the farther down you go, and I mean literally farther down, like if you go into a tunnel, the more likely you are to encounter people who think that they know and say that certain things are impossible that in fact happen all the time in other places. And then when you point this out, they want something that is the exact same thing and is an exact sequence of steps that they can replicate without reading any English language but German written textbook about how things are done. And then because there are always little, and because there are always little special circumstances, they think that that confirms that America is special, and not just that America needs to hire German engineers or Spanish engineers or Italian or French or maybe Japanese and Korean engineers and just have them redo the right-of-way geometry and the turnout geometry. Um, and so so again, you can save on something that is very much not hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a few hundreds of thousands per switch you build. This is a lot of switches, but we're still talking maybe low tens of millions, even with the underground premium. And that saves you about a minute on each side of Penn Station. Better noses, you can run faster through this tunnel, especially if you build this second tunnel. You might be able to speed this up by a little bit. Not by enough that you should ever build Gateway for any purpose other than commuter rail. This is very important. Gateway is really good for commuter rail capacity. For no other reason is it good. Amtrak is currently selling it as resilience because Amtrak wants to be able to spend money without actually having to promise a more frequent timetable for anyone, including commuter rail users. For the same reason, Amtrak really likes talking about uh, flood proofing the Northeast corridor. So this is where I'm kind of, you can see that this is not where the trains are, the red line. This is I-95. But this line, they think it's flood threatened, which it isn't. It wasn't particularly vulnerable during Sandy. But they like talking about flood proofing and climate resilience because that way they can get to sound environmentalist um, while promoting something that is actually climate apartheid, that is adaptation rather than mitigation of climate change. And also that gets them to spend a lot of money without having to show anything tangible. Right? I mean, passengers might see the flood walls, but they're not going to see faster trains, aren't going to see more frequent trains, aren't going to see cheaper trains, aren't going to see more reliable trains. Um, they're not going to see more comfortable trains. They're just going to be told money has been spent, be proud, government spending is good. If you disagree, you're Margaret Thatcher. Um, and so the and so again, I'm being very oppositional to Amtrak here because Amtrak really doesn't know what they're doing, and the commuter railways really don't know what they're doing. But this really is always about starting from speeding up the slowest segments. So Penn Station to the Portal right now, if you sit on a train in time, it's about 5 minutes, which I think is a deterioration. It used to be 4. I don't know if it's a real deterioration or I used to time it at 4:20 and rounded it to 4, and now it's 4. And one time, or maybe once or twice, it was 4:40 and I rounded it. Um, but it's something like 4.5 minutes, maybe, let's say, each direction from Penn Station to when you see light. And this should be probably about 2 minutes. Again, partly through the interlocking, partly through just speeding up through the tunnel. Um, this is like 5 kilometers. This should not be 4 minutes. This should, I mean, it's only one station. The trains accelerate poorly, but they don't accelerate that poorly. Um, and yeah, so it's always about finding really slow zones and then speeding them up. And sometimes it's a few tens of millions here for interlocking fixes, sometimes just increasing speeds. And if a scheduler tells you that this can't be done for some reason, you fire the scheduler and get people who um, know how modern scheduling works, which again is not American. Remember, in a train, the modern is not American. America is stuck in the 1950s. Americans who are in this business, who are really in the weeds of it, tend to be stuck in the 1950s socially and institutionally, and their ideas. It's like talking to someone who does not know that containers have been invented, or that computers that are smaller than an entire room and have programming languages that are more recent than BASIC have been invented. BASIC is not even 50s. BASIC is a thing from 1964. Um, the New Brunswick Trenton is already complete? Huh. Okay. I thought it was still under. I thought it was still under construction for some reason. Um, so yeah, so it's always about the slowest segments first. So for example, New York to Newark, there are lots of speed limits here that are not even sharp curves between. Like this is not a very wide curve, right? I mean, I used to have a database of all the curves, but also the database was kind of wrong. So, but we can check this here. So let's try to draw 870-ish. This is, so Americans like doing curves in something called degrees, which is a really weird thing where 1 degree is 1746 meters and it's inverted. And you kind of see that this is, I think the curve is actually a little wider than this. Um, the problem is you can't use the tool to move the edge to fine tune like this. You have to move the center. Yeah, but I think that this is, so there are employee timetables that tell you the exact degrees of each curve sometime, but I only have them for parts of the line, not all of the line. If anyone wants to leak them to me, please do. I've seen leaks for some, but not all lines. Like I think it's been leaked to me for all of Metro North. So yeah, this is roughly a 2-degree curve. So it's about 870 meters because 1746 divided by 2 is 873. Um, so if it's, let's say, 870, and remember, uh, vanilla is 1.67. That is 137 kilometers an hour. But we don't want to be vanilla. I mean, what's the point of being vanilla? We can go more aggressive. And if it's Germany aggressive, it's 2.08. And then we're 153 kilometers an hour. And if we do what I think they should do, which is acquire the technology for active suspension, um, provided it's not too expensive. I mean, there is a price at which you should just say, no, we're not doing that. We're buying vanilla Velaros, so it's 2.08. Maybe a bit more if you go nuttier on the super elevation. So let's try to be a little more apples to apples and do um, what is it? Um, so it's 200 millimeters cant, and all of these trains are passenger trains, by the way, and they can be pretty fast passenger trains. So um, so you should never worry about the tracks being overcounted. And importantly, going out of New York, the trains are just going to be at Penn Station, so they're never going to. So outbound, they should never stay stuck here. Inbound, there's Secaucus, so they should never get stuck here either. So there's no reason for trains to get stuck on this particular curve. In general, if it's only a passenger aircraft, just go nuts on super elevation. You should be fine. So 200 millimeters should be fine. So if we don't tilt, it's going to be 350, like this. So 2.3 even. And then this is suddenly a 160 kilometers an hour curve. This is roughly the maximum I'm comfortable with through the tunnel, which is very narrow in dimensions. So if you go too fast, there's going to be a lot of noise and the air, and it's going to be hard to push the air out of the way. This is why high-speed rail tunnels have much larger radius than just required to fit in the train. Only sometimes the cross-sectional area of these tunnels is 6 times, maybe even 7 times as much as the cross-sectional area of the train. And here it's more like 2 times, 2.5 times. So you can go maybe 160 kilometers an hour. The trains are currently limited to 100. You might need some streamlining on the commuter trains, but all of the commuter trains that go through here are obsolete trash anyway on New Jersey Transit, and they can be replaced also just to speed up New Jersey Transit, so that's not a big deal. I mean, it's money, but it's money that's something like $2 billion to replace the entire fleet, maybe a few $100 million to fix the platforms elsewhere in New Jersey Transit. And all of this money greatly benefits New Jersey Transit commuters because it also speeds up New Jersey Transit trips to Manhattan. It also speeds up these trips even on branches because the trains perform better. They're much lower maintenance, much lower operating cost, wheelchair accessible because high platforms mean that passengers in wheelchairs can just roll on and nobody needs to deploy a special ramp for them. So this is a bundle, but it's a bundle that's actually of great benefits, of great tangible benefits. Again, it's not the kind of state of good repair racket or the climate resilience racket or the shut down the other tunnel for maintenance kind of racket. This is something where I can point out to you where a passenger can see that the things are getting better, to which trains are becoming more reliable and faster, and passengers in wheelchairs can roll on unaided. As a kind of universal design. I mean, wheelchair accessibility is not a racket. Wheelchair accessibility is visible expansion. I mean, you need to not think that people with disabilities are dregs, which mentality is far too common in New York in particular. It's not an American one, it's a New York problem. Boston and Chicago are way better at this. But this does require, but modulo being even minimally sensitive, this is visible improvement. This is currently about 5 minutes, and this should be, or maybe 4.5, and this should be more like 2 minutes, if that. And this is again 160 kilometer an hour curve. You can speed into about 200. This is another problem. This is called Portal Bridge. It's a movable bridge. The problem is not that it's movable. The problem is that it's ancient, and somehow fixing it involves political heavyweights that micromanage everyone, and then managers who don't know how modern bridges are built who also micromanage everyone. And what is a completely vanilla bridge is costing like a base tunnel. I mean, not an actual base tunnel, because an actual base tunnel is very long, and this is, but per kilometer, as if it were a rather complex base tunnel. Um, and they're only, I think, replacing it with either a two or three track structure, because they fight over who's on the hook for making it a four track structure. So they're kind of like cementing this kind of two track capacity while insisting that they should build Gateway. Um, as I said, I'm very oppositional to the New York area commuter railways. I'm worried that they're being too nice to them, if anything. Um, do I know why 200 millimeters is not more commonly used in dedicated high-speed rail? Um, yeah, so 200 millimeters, again, it's only used when you absolutely have to, because um, just for future proofing, things are usually built with larger curve radius than necessary. The Northeast Corridor is kind of an exception in the plans that I'm drawing, just because it's so constrained that you have to use limit values for everything. But for example, the Shinkansen was built during World War II, even some tunnels were built with 2.5 kilometer curve radius, which is unthinkably wide at the time, for a speed of 150 kilometers an hour. So let's just do the computation. So 150. Um, so it's 0.69. It's absurdly wide, and then when it actually opened for 210, um, it was 1.36, so still very doable. And but it was future-proof to the point that they can even squeeze 285 out of it. So 2.5, so 2.5 meters per second squared. This is the limit value. Again, it is not used in new build. It is used when you're retrofitting something on a very old line. For example, speeds that are literally from a few years ago, on a line that opened in 1964 and has certain infrastructure that is from World War II. So the reason it's not done elsewhere is that elsewhere it's not needed. The TGV, for example, didn't build such tight curves because it was planning on much higher speeds. The TGV was planning on 260 kilometers an hour, and so it mostly built around 4 kilometer curve radius. So 1.3, that's very future-proof. And if I believe there are 7 curves between Paris and Lyon that are 3.2, so this was vanilla at the time. And I think the trains don't actually do full speed. I think they only do 270, but maybe they've clocked them up to 300 at this point. I'm not sure. Um, but um, but now on the 400, they do 300 kilometers an hour, because the trains, for example, are built with 300, because only in maybe the 2000s have they started producing in Europe trains that are 320. Um, so this is the situation on the TGV today, on most of the TGV today, and yes, they're upgrading it, but that requires new trains, for example. When they built the TGV duplex, they didn't think that they would go much faster than 300. And so they are capable of doing it, they just aren't doing it, because again, they don't need to, the curves are not that tight normally. It's just that on this line they are, and every minute counts, and you're not going to be able to make up for it by having very long stretches of 300 or 350 kilometers running. So if the curve radius is enough for 380, is there any need for future proofing beyond 380? The answer is yes. I mean, just think that in the 2000s, people might ask, is there any need for future proofing beyond 300 or 320? Um, I mean, in Germany, they are even kind of regressing to 250, 200, maybe 280 for kind of stupid reasons, but they're still planning around the possibility of 300, 330 maybe. In Britain, they're planning around 400. I don't think they will run at 400, but maybe they will be able to. I mean, they claimed in Japan that 360 is too much in the fast tech experiment, but they are still um, working on it when they're going to get from Tokyo to Sapporo to try to compete with air. So, so sometimes they don't want to deal with the extra expenses of running faster for certain practical reasons, but these practical reasons change. It's not an inherent limit to the tech. The tech moves. So, so you want to build the right of way geometry based as far as possible around reasonable expectations of future tech and not just present tech, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I mean, I don't think that, for example, the assumption that 400 kilometers an hour is feasible is any stupider than the assumption that Hyperloop can actually be deployed commercially. Um, which I don't think is a stupid assumption. I think that Hyperloop is not ready for commercial use right now. In 30 years, who the hell knows? I mean, I think 30 years is kind of an aggressive timeline. It might be 50, but or more, um, but who knows? Um, but anyway, so the point is, we talk. I mean, we keep talking about things like 300 and 400. But remember, the real difference is the real workhorse for the difference between high speed and legacy is not 300 versus 400. It's barely even 200 versus 300. It's always these weird things that are 30 versus 80 or 50 versus 100 or 70 versus 150. So this is a curve that is very tight, but it's not that big of a deal this close to Newark. But I think they can just speed it up with better super elevation. Um, they might need to move the structure. I'm not sure. Um, this is not very high value uh, land. This is industrial. Um, like in general, I mean, I don't know if we're gonna. I think we should. I think we should. But when we get to the I-95 bypass during Connecticut, I'm gonna show you how I can play Bush consultant. Bush like small b, Bush like the Australian Bush, not like the Bush family, which I'm sure employs very highly paid consultants. Um, so anyway, Newark, um, non-important curve. This is the next really annoying curve. This is called the Elizabeth S curve. Um, and you can see that, and you can know that it is an important curve because you see divergence between my red line and the line that is actually in place. This is an S curve. Um, the speed limit here is hilariously low. I want to say it's maybe 40 miles an hour or something. Even the current geometry is better than this. And I'm told that actually someone who's trolling me a lot on Twitter um, is trying to get this changed. Like I mean, there are engineers at Amtrak who are trying to get this changed and just think it's harder than it actually is. But it doesn't matter because for high speed rail purposes, um, because for high speed rail purposes you need to bypass this anyway because this might be I think the curve radius here is maybe good for 140 kilometers an hour, but 140 is kind of meh. Um, and if you do this, and this is again, this involves staking, so you probably need to level this garage. This is called Union County College. This is a building that didn't exist when I started writing about this in the late 2000s. It has been built more recently for, I believe, 50 million. Take it for 50 million, move it here, please. Um, this, I do not know what this building is, but this is this a warehouse? This looks like a single story warehouse, so the not very valuable. This is a housing project. I remember that at one time I computed the value of this if you resettle all the tenants at, I want to say 100 million. But anyway, I mean, by all means, zap the parking lot or tell people to walk under you can't do this in earthworks anyway because you're crossing this river. So this is a viaduct anyway. Just tell people to walk under the viaduct. Um, and and if people complain about noise, first of all, importantly, they don't have balconies. You can see. So just get better glazing on all of these windows. Um, and yeah, so this is something where you can get trains to run probably 200-ish kilometers an hour through Elizabeth. And yes, it's elevated, but you can actually do noise walls. You can do triple glazing on these windows and make sure that they're hinged rather than slide windows, which are also going to be better for energy efficiency. So it's going to save the residents on their heating bills. Um, but the but you're not actually doing residential takings here. Here, um, there are still no takings. You're close to this building. You're not actually on this building. This is enough separation. So not especially enough separation if you go a little bit farther. I don't think you can go that much farther east, but you can go a little bit farther east. Um, this is the townhouse might need to go. I'm not sure. It's not that many apartments, but it might need to go. I'm not sure. The parking certainly would need to go. So again, this is takings, but it's something that's doing a massive speed up because unless you want to do a slalom, you're probably just going to go 200-ish Newark to the curve. So the thing is, I have speed zones here. So the speed zone, this is going to be the Newark to Philadelphia speed zone. Um, and because I'm very smart when I wrote these speed zones, so 16 is New York to Newark. But see, when I'm going to hit show elevation profile, it's not going to start from 16. It's starting from 0. So Elizabeth, the S curve here, is about 10 kilometers. And there's also a curve at 3, which is, again, it's not a really problematic curve because it's this close, but it's a thing. So remember the numbers 16.3 and 16.10, and let's look here. Like this. So 16.3 is 250, and I contend that when you straighten this S curve, this is a dead letter curve. You stay at 250 kilometers an hour. You continue 250. This is a straightaway, but you don't have too many speed up opportunities here for several reasons. First of all, noise. First of all, remember 250 is in many ways good enough. New York to Hamburg averages something very fast, or could, topping at 230. So there's noise. It's not that residential near the railway, but there's a fair amount of residential, and like my I don't listen to neighbors mentality means I don't listen to neighbors. It doesn't mean I hate people who live near trains and want them to have low quality of life. I just think that that especially when they organize in local groups, they're incorrect about what constitutes quality of life, and these organizations tend to have weird opinions that are based on very prejudicial ideas. Things that I sometimes call a Karen, but I think but the example that I keep going to is the woman played by Alison Janney in the animation film Over the Hedge. The one who's constantly obsessed with property values and with removing all the animals from the last patch of forest that remains. So you keep it 250. Again, there's noise, but more importantly, if you speed up, you're going to need to slow down because this is a curvy area around Metro Park and Metuchen. I don't think even Amtrak wants to fix it. I think at one point, I think I saw an Amtrak speed diagram that said that this would always be 100 miles an hour, which is kind of bad. The current speed today is 100 miles an hour. You should straighten this to some extent. And this is good for 250 kilometers an hour the way I drew it. And this involves residential takings. Now this is a very low density area, cul-de-sacs, so we can even try to count. Like maybe this is already taken, so this is 5, 6, 7, let's say, maybe 8. These all have to go, so this is 12, maybe 13. Suppose it was one house, it's be 14, 15, 16. Not sure about these. Um, but know that they can count, and so far this is 2 digits, and the first digit is 1. Maybe with a couple of these extras, the first digit is going to be 2, but we're talking something like 25 houses. Um, and now um, Metuchen is a middle class suburb. Okay, it is not a master of the universe suburb. People in Metuchen don't think that they're the richest place in the world. They are not. They're much richer than the rest of Jersey, but they're not that wealthy. Um, this is affordable. This is what, a kilometer of line? More than a kilometer, yeah. So this bypass is maybe 2 kilometers. I don't think the cost of real estate acquisition is going to be the majority of this. So I think it's going to be maybe a $20 million or a $30 million project, which includes real estate not accusation, acquisition. Um, but um, but moving the tracks like this, it's more of an earthworks project. And here, same thing. So this is townhouses. But on many. Actually, this might be a strip mall, not a. Yeah, this does not look like. Okay, is this a mall? Yeah, this might actually be a cheap hotel. I can't tell. So I don't know the land use of literally everything I've drawn the line through. Um, so I can't tell whether this is townhouses, um, or some kind of office park. No, this can't be an office park. It has to be townhouses. This is but again, it's not that many units take on. And so again, it's a few million here, a few million there. I mean, for very complex things, a few tens of millions, but not something actually big. Um, I believe this is industrial. So industrial, first of all, means not very high value, and second, it means that the owner has an MBA or pretends to have an MBA and will actually sell for something approximating market rate without calling you Hitler in the local press. Um, and from here, you just go at full speed. So 360 is what I wrote. You might need to compromise because this really does have noise problems. This is about 27.7 kilometers, and then up until around here, and then you need to start dropping speed. So this is New York to Philadelphia, basically. Um, and the only next real problem, again, simplicity requires slight curve modifications, but nothing huge. Um, and now we're at Frankfurt Junction. Frankfurt Junction is, I believe, the tightest curve between the immediate zones of New York and Philadelphia. It is worse than Elizabeth. Um, and the problem is that the S curve here is just terrible. So I don't know. I don't even know how fast trains go. It doesn't really matter because they tend to be very conservative about this, even at SEPTA. Um, so maybe 400 meters. On the tighter half, this is much wider, of course. It's kind of visible on the map that this is the harder part. So 400 meters. So 400. If we have to be maximally aggressive here. So with Shinkansen, with active suspension, this is going to be 113 kilometers an hour. And if we only have, let's say, if we are only as aggressive as Germany, or let's be more aggressive and on our super elevation, because this is a tight curve, so it's unlikely there are going to be trains ever that are can't accessed, even if they are not that fast. That's 109, 110 versus 113 kilometers an hour. So this is why it's nice to get better rolling stock, but if if the revision constant costs too much, don't sweat it. This is also why I'm against the new trains that Amtrak is getting. They for a bunch of reasons, of which the really high performance specs for tilting is just one. Another is by America. A third is that Chuck Schumer sabotaged the bid in order to say that he's creating jobs in upstate New York. These trains cost double. And the cost of doing the same trip time improvements through infrastructure on the margin is actually lower than the cost of the extra tilt on the Villa Liberties. Um, but anyway, you don't want to run into 110 kilometers an hour, even in Philly. I mean, this is Philly, but it's not center city. It's still kind of far. So let's not go that slow. So this curve should be fixed to something that is still an S curve. You can eliminate the S. So in the Elizabeth, by the way, I also did not fully eliminate the S. I just stretched it so that you can reverse the curve and have um, and have more super elevation. If you have a very tight S, which here you don't, the S here is not tight. The curves are tight. But if the S is what's tight, then you can't even do a lot of super elevation, which is really bad. Um, but here, if you eliminate the S, the curve needs to be west of the line that I drew because this is the straight line of this azimuth. Uh, Maybe a little bit, but I mean, but you don't want to slice this much of North Philadelphia. Don't get me wrong, it's not that residentially dense, and the property values here kind of suck. But I mean, it's still pretty dense, and it's still money that you don't want to have to spend, especially if you're going to deal with, for example, hitting the L, because this is going to be elevated, whatever bypass you build. So you have to go elevated over the L. So you kind of want to make sure that this is all done by the time you hit the L here. So we don't want to do that. We will keep the S. But again, S curves today, I mean, track geometry machines build them without any kind of problems. You need to make sure you have enough time to reverse the curve. This is about 3 minutes, or not 3 minutes, this is very much not 3 minutes, it would be hilarious. 3 seconds of time, which comes from this really cool, so HSR construction standard. This is from KTH, which did a lot of really good work on Railtech. Oh, the Avila Liberty is push well. I thought it was like the SL. I thought for some reason it was like the SL and the TGV Park already turned. Anyway, no. The Avila Liberty is just trash talk, and Alstom, and I doubt that Alstom ever wants to sell that outside the United States or any derivative of that outside the United States. Outside the US, they just mostly try to sell AGVs, which are EMUs. They're not very successful at it. They've sold it to NTV, which is the private operator in Italy competing with the state operator. But I don't think they've had other sales. Usually, like the trims are a little bit weird because they have these articulated bogies and they don't have standard length cars. And so for the most part, when people buy not just China, but obviously mostly China, when they like buying, unless they are buying unless someone buys turnkey tech, like when Morocco bought turnkey TGV tech, or when India is buying turnkey Japanese tech, mostly they like buying trains that are very standard, and these are, and kind of like the most standard ones are the Velaros, so 25-meter cars, standard bogies. Um, it's kind of ironic. I mean, American cars are already kind of standardized in dimensions, but literally nothing else. So anyway, you don't want to be S3. You want to have the S. This is why my red line here S's. So let's see. So this is a charter school. You might need to partially demolish this and then rebuild nearby, which I mean it's fine. There's lots of sites. So one of the things, North Philly is a very depressed area. This might be northeast and not north, but it's still there's a lot of very high land value, and you can kind of see that there are abandoned lots here, or just random parking lots, random surface parking lots. Um, this is a very low income area, um, and I don't mean low income in the sense just that the people are poor, but also in the sense that there's enough abandonment that you could actually sometimes knock down a building and build it literally across the street. Um, but it's still money, rebuilding at least part of the charter school, but it's not that much money. Um, so all of again, the real estate part. So this is, so a bunch of empties, some industrial land. So remember, so a good intuition on this is that railroads were historically how all of industry moved. So the land use near a railway that was built in the steam era would be industrial, especially an American railway, because the United States never really did any kind of TOD except specifically in commuter suburbs. But this is not a commuter suburb. This is Philadelphia. So this is an area that did not ever urbanize next to the railway. It urbanized along the street network, and for example, the L. Especially when you realize that the reason this is such a tight curve is that the original line did not go like this. The original line went whip, whip, whip into here, and this was the terminus in Philadelphia, Kensington. Um, this you might notice is rather far from Center City. So passengers preferred to ride the competing line. Actually, I'm not sure whether it was competing or whether it was a monopoly of the New Jersey Railroad, which then became part of the Pennsylvania Railroad. But passengers prefer to go to Camden and then ride a ferry. So recognizes in recognition that they needed to have a better terminus than Kensington, then they built this curve and something called the connecting railroad, and then they got to Center City. So not only that, this curve is bad because of its location near a railway junction. So obviously, it's going to be very industrial land, and it's not modern industry, which is very land intensive and also, but also, but also productive. Maybe not in America, but certainly in Germany, car factories that are actually for global exports. This is old industry. This is stuff that's kind of the symbol of deindustrialization. So this is low value land. And it's also not generating a lot of jobs because, again, deindustrialization. Um, so, so this means that usually doing takings here is easier. So warehouse, parking, what looks like a warehouse, because if it were an active factory, it would, because if it were active manufacturing, the roof might look a little different, I'm not sure. So you can kind of see how much of this is literally empty, or how much of it is wooded, not even as conservation forest. You can kind of see the woods have kind of grown around rail terminals. This is just a disused rail terminal. And yes, a few of the buildings here are residential, but not many. And maybe you're hitting a few row houses, but only a few. So this is not going to be difficult eminent domain. It's also not going to be expensive. It's also not going to be community disruptive because, again, this is on the side of a railroad that was always very noisy, very dirty. It's, if anything, cleaner than ever and quieter than ever, just because it's just because of the decline of diesel freight and the passenger trains are electric. So you're not splitting a neighborhood because this was always on the margin of the neighborhood. Now, if you were to, I don't know, zap through Torresdale Avenue, there would be something very different. But we're not doing that. We're not doing an entire bypass on Torresdale, on Torresdale and Erie. We're doing slight fixes to the curve to make this about 180, maybe 200 kilometers. Let me see what I wrote here, because what I would have written, this looks like 206, like 160 actually. So this looks like 160. I think if you zap the charter school, you can even go to 100. You might need to take a few row houses, but again, not very high property values. You can find places to resettle. Remember, this is an area that is so historically disinvested in that there's literature that I will find if people ask me in comments that gentrification in this part of Philadelphia has actually led to better outcomes for the established residents. In New York, more recently, it leads to displacement. So people who, for example, leave Bushwick, not gentrifiers who just moved and are now leaving. I mean, historic, mostly black working class Bushwick residents who leave Bushwick are genuinely displaced. So you can kind of see that they leave the neighborhood to lower quality, for example, for job access neighborhoods than working class black people who leave non-gentrifying neighborhoods of New York. But in Philadelphia, especially historically, it's different just because there's still vacant land here. So again, this is not community disruption. This is very little residential takings. I mean, I'm guessing that all of this is single-digit residences, and again, mostly industrial things. which are not very profitable. So it's not like these jobs. It's not like you're destroying jobs because again, there's not many jobs left there. So you go to 160 through Philadelphia. This obviously also tremendously helps SEPTA. So for commuters, so for commuters from this part of Philly, this is also going to get them faster trips. And then Zoo is a really annoying curve. Not in the sense that the radius is bad. The radius is about 400 meters, give or take. But it's currently a flat curve because they also decided that this is the best place for an interlocking. No, not 400, 350. Um, they decided this is the best place for an interlocking instead of moving the interlocking to around here. And then it might require playing with things with the bridge over here and maybe even building another bridge here, but the Schuylkill is not a very wide river. That's not going to be a big deal. And then you can cant this curve, and if it's 350 times, let's say again 2.3, it's 100 kilometers an hour. Yeah, I mean that's fine. This close to, I mean it's 2 kilometers from 30th Street Station. So this is how you're doing New York Philly in, I believe, 44 minutes. Now, you could keep doing this with Philly. I mean, the bypasses south of Philly are more blatant. Um, so you might want to do a bypass of Wilmington. So that would be roughly along I-95. So partly maybe I-95 zaps and Lesterland and Edgemar, and then maybe use a grade separate version of the Philly bypass. Or maybe go farther south than 495. But I don't think it's that worth it. I mean, it's kind of close because Wellington is a slowdown. It's not a very big city, but I mean, Wellington is not nothing. Um, so probably trains should keep stopping here. Should be forced to stop here. Um, at some point, my line does diverge. So um, around, so let me see if I, yeah, so around here, there's a little bit of a divergence just to avoid this curve. Which is fine. This is basically the least industrial, the least, not industrial, the least urbanized thing between New York and DC. Amtrak keeps talking about bridge replacements here, maybe, but I don't think they're necessary. A lot of it is Amtrak being very squeamish about things. Um, and again, demanding money with nothing to show for it. It's not like Amtrak is saying, okay, if you let us replace these bridges, the trains are going to be 5 minutes faster, or if you let us do this, then we can hit our 95% on-time performance without slowing down the timetable. They don't think like that. They just say, we need this, and trust us. We know what we're doing. Our OAG, which knows nothing about how SNCF and DB works, claims that SNCF and DB are not making money on their intercity trains. That's the quality of the people involved. Like they insist on trust when they have no reason to earn any of it. Um, but so maybe this is a good thing, but I don't know. And Amtrak's word is not meaningful to me. Um, ditto this bridge. Ditto this bridge. Um, then you get to Baltimore. Baltimore. It's again where you want to look at the slowest segments first. So this is a project that's been on the state and especially on the FRA's mind for many years, maybe 20 years or so. So this is the current line. This is actually slightly longer. It's called the Great Circle Tunnel, the idea for this. And there's actually a really good FRA, let me actually find FRA Great Circle Tunnel proposal. Baltimore and Potomac. I don't want your thing from 2021 though, that is bullshit. Um, so here's the problem. There was this really good study on this in 2008, 2009 on these on what is called the Baltimore and Potomac tunnels. Oh, the AGV were just too expensive. So thanks, Bernanke. Is it 42 mil versus 30 mil dollars or euros? Because I or if it's euro, or if it's dollars, are you do like what kind of conversion rate are you doing this? Because I like doing, I just like thinking in euros when I do straight internal European things because um I would rather do the euro dollar conversion once and not a million times. Um, at any rate, this is called the Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel. It was built more recently than the Transcontinental Railway. This is how terrible Baltimore's topography is. Again, it's a really good study from about 2008, 2009 that detailed how Baltimore, so the Northeast in general does not have a coastal plain. You can kind of maybe see the hills here on Google Earth, even very close to the coast. You've definitely seen them if you've ever taken the Hudson line in New York up the Palisades. I mean, not literally up. I mean, they're on the water line, but next to the Palisades. You can know there's no coastal plain. There's very little actual flat land for easily building a steam railway, and all of this was already occupied by the city of Baltimore by the time that trains arrived. So it used to be that there was the Baltimore and Ohio, which this was the station, Camden Station. So they went like this. This was the main line from on the B&O. So from Ellicott City to Points West. This was to the line that is currently being colored like it's a commuter line is their line to DC. There was the competing line by the Penn, by the but I guess the Pennsylvania Railroad didn't exist then, but it was, or it did, but it wasn't the behemoth it would become like a generation later. But it kind of cobbled together a line from various branches and then got here maybe, and then it had a line already, I believe, going up until maybe here. So they didn't have a connection through Baltimore. And in the Civil War, this was actually a problem because Baltimore was a pro-Confederate city. I mean, Maryland had slavery. Um, Now, West Virginia had slavery and Delaware had slavery, but my understanding is that, but West Virginia was kind of Appalachians who were yeoman farmers, or it was up the mountains. They didn't have big plantations. They were all white and had white racial ID, and after the war became horrifically racist, but they didn't like slavery. For them, slavery was the lowland big plantation owners who were oppressing them, the poor whites. Um, but in Maryland, there was much more support for slavery, and it had to be occupied by federal troops because otherwise, both Maryland and Virginia would have been Confederate, and DC would have been surrounded by Confederate uh, territory. DC, I mean, had slavery, but I mean, DC uh, was very anti-slavery as a city. It did not have literally any self-government at the time, but the residents of DC were very fiercely anti-slavery. Um, but again, Baltimore was very pro. So in the Northeast, the main centers of support for abolition were Philadelphia and Boston, plus more inland. So inland, they were very abolitionist. In the upstate New York, the Midwest was very. I mean, Lincoln was from Illinois, but on the East Coast, Boston and Philly were abolitionists. New York was the main port of export of slave farmed cotton. So the mayor of New York wanted to secede, wanted the city to secede and join the Confederacy. And many of the many white New Yorkers sympathized with the Confederacy in what is called a draft riot, and sometimes called as some kind of Irish American identity thing. No, they were just racist. I mean, when you're doing a draft riot, you don't look for where the black people are and then murder them. Um, I mean, there was plenty of draft rioting in Vietnam. They didn't look for, they didn't drive down to Florida for, to find Cuban refugees from communism and kill them or something. They just were anti-military. In New York and in Baltimore, they were pro-Confederacy, pro-slavery, very racist. So it was so to bring goods from the Northeast, which at the time, remember, this is the Mason-Dixon line. At the time, north, south, north, south. This is south in the Civil War. To this day, you can find a lot of people, mostly black people, who will tell you that DC and Maryland are still the South. Um, Almost to the point that DC and Maryland are kind of northern if you're white and southern if you're black today. But at the time, they were just southern. And so goods had to be escorted by federal troops, or troop trains had to be escorted by federal troops across Baltimore. And so after the war, they had to build tunnels. There were two railroads, the B&O and the Pennsylvania. They did not collaborate because why would they collaborate? So they built two tunnels, both horrifically compromised on alignments. Um, so the B&O got a single track tunnel. It's not the same as the blue colored lines, just a parallel thing. But this is a single track tunnel used for freight. The passenger trains only go as far as Camden Station to the south. It's used by CSX, which is, again, the successor of the B&O in the north. And the and Pennsylvania Railroad got this tunnel, which is called the Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel, because Potomac is for DC. The point is to get Baltimore to DC. This is an incredibly curvy thing. I mean, again, it doesn't look terribly curvy because it's straight, awful curve, kind of bad curve. But the speed limit today is 30 miles an hour. They can possibly speed it up a little bit, but not by that much. The grades are kind of annoying. Everything, the tunnel, I think, leaks, so the maintenance costs here are really high, and they want to replace it. And this is where this Great Circle Tunnel idea comes from. And I don't think I drew it perfectly correctly. I think in actual fact, a little bit farther out. I think maybe like this. But I think it's vaguely like this, maybe a little wrong, I'm not sure. But so the idea is to replace these tight curves with one wider curve and permit, I don't remember the speed that they were talking about, possibly dead letter compared with so if I'm kind of pretending it's a single curve, it might be well more than a kilometer. At which point it's really dead letter. I don't know. I mean, I think they said 80 miles an hour in the original study, but this could even be 160 to 200 kilometers an hour. First of all, this is kind of curvy. But second, more importantly, this needs to be built. Now, this is supposed to be a two-track tunnel. It's more than enough for everything because it's right next to Baltimore, so you're not ever running very fast here. You're running at medium speed, that's fine, but you're running here, and then you can go up to 4 tracks. This line is mostly 4 tracks on the surface. It's 3 and 4 tracks. And then you go on, and then maybe you make the commuter train stop in West Baltimore. That's fine. And then, maybe you stop them here for the light rail transfer. I'm not sure. Only if you really want to. So they had this plan to do a 2-track tunnel for $750 million. This is what they should be doing. Somehow this scope crept to 4 tracks with much wider bores for each track to allow for double stacked freight and then mechanical ventilation in each tube to allow for diesel locomotives, even though these are electrified tracks. Amtrak is electric. MARC, the commuter trains, used to be electric, and then they went back to diesel because I can't tell if they're stupid or Amtrak is stupid. I think it's both. Amtrak was kind of screwing them on electric rates. They were leasing, or I think I'm not sure if leasing or piggybacking on. I think leasing really old Amtrak electric locomotives, AM7s, the toasters, and then when they stopped running, and when Amtrak went to more recent but still kind of sucky diesel, electric locomotives, not diesel electric locomotives, MARC just de-electrified and just went back to diesel. So instead of actually going back, and instead of trashing the trains and running EMUs frequently, they think that they should have diesel. And again, the diesel is not for MARC, by the way. The diesel is for the possibility of freight, even though in the 2000s, Fred said, we don't need this tunnel, is enough for us. So this scope crept from 750 million to 4 billion. This should be rescoped back to, descoped back to 750 million. And then it's pretty clear. I mean, you need maybe a few bypasses here again through some of the least developed land between New York and DC. That's fine. This is New York to DC. Um, you need to do some changes. Yeah, you need to fix slow zones like this, which again, unlike the other slow zones, something that is an active development. They want to do it. They just scope crept it to how. Um, um, Wilmington maybe bypass, maybe don't. I'm not sure. Philadelphia, just make sure that you can move the location of the uh, interlocking to maybe here or something, so that this can be counted. Um, Fix Frankfurt. Again, it's mostly the slow zones. I mean, yes, you can do some segments of well more than 300 kilometers an hour, but that's on the main increase in speed that gets New York to DC like this to a minute 40, to not a minute 40, an hour 40. Is this study? Um, Baltimore's Railroad Network Executive Summary. I believe so. I mean, I can't see this right now because what are you doing? Oh God, what? Why? Why do they assume that everyone has 300 kinds of surveillance tech software installed? Why are they like this? Okay, please work. I believe it is this one. Yeah. Thanks, Larry. So yes, this study from the 2000s. Um, Now, going north of New York is harder. So you do have to fix. By the way, you do have to fix the catenary south of New York. Don't forget, not just the parts that the part that I thought was under construction is already done. And I'm pretty sure that if I check the timetables right now on Amtrak, I will not notice the difference. Um, so not just this section, but everything. But that's fine. I mean, this needs to be done anyway. It's done right, not even that expensive. It's better for maintenance. Um, Now, east of New York, it's a little harder, and I'm going to skip the parts that are in New York, which again possibly should be done, especially if more lines are built, because then more and more, because I think that if it's just the Northeast harder, then traffic is probably going to be, let's say, 6 trains an hour, let's say up to New Haven, and then it's 2 to Springfield, 4 to Boston. And that's fine on current infrastructure. Yes, it means no gateway. Yes, it means you might need to float 2 commuter trains from New York to Trenton. That's fine. You're going to have high-speed trains from New York to Trenton. Just sell standing tickets as in Germany. These are longer trains. You're increasing capacity. Congratulations. I've created a little bit more, not a lot more, but a little bit more capacity for you for no tunnel. But again, the tunnel should be built, just not for $10 billion or whatever they think it should be built. At any rate, in New York, I don't think they are fixing curves. I mean, maybe a little bit in the Bronx. I'm not sure. I mean, it's just mostly here. Um, I just think that over here they don't have enough super elevation more than anything, but they can run at like 160 kilometers an hour, possibly 200. Let me see what I actually wrote. So New York, New Rochelle. You leave Penn at 80. You might need to slow down a little bit, but that's fractions of a minute from 80 to let's say 50 over this distance. 100. Yeah, so this is mostly 160-ish. The 130 bit is for the Hellgate Bridge. This is an unfixable tunnel, not tunnel, an unfixable curve. Because, see, on the inside, what you have is not the most valuable um, anything, but first of all, you might need to do some takings on the foot. And second, this is a really complex truss bridge. Um, so you probably are not fixing that. If this is a problem, again, this is 6 trains per hour, and it's fine. But you might need more if you keep building all the connecting lines that I'm crayoning, and then if you have also more commuter traffic, you might need to give Amtrak a dedicated tunnel eventually. But this should not be the second tunnel. Like so, right now this is one tunnel. The second tunnel would be Gateway. My guess is that Amtrak gets like the fifth or something tunnel, if that. Um, if it's dedicated, but that's where the New York New Rochelle 2 bit comes from, where you just bypass and just go here, but you still go through the Bronx. I mean, that's fine. all of this has space for 4 tracks, for example. Um, it's mostly 2 tracks, but it has space for 4. Um, the only real change you want to do is over here. Um, there's this straight bridge with really sharp tunnels connecting, not tunnels, curves connecting. So you want to replace it with a curvy bridge. It's also a movable bridge. Like in general, there's a problem with movable bridges that are rather sharp curve-wise. The big change you want to do is New Rochelle. Again, always fix the slowest part first. This is a 30 miles an hour interlocking. It's the worst interlocking, I think, in the United States for passenger trains. Um, Even more than the ones near New York, more than Zoo, because that's Philadelphia and this is New York. I mean, so this is the New Haven line, so it goes like this, and I believe peak traffic is 20 trains an hour. Amtrak goes like this, so there are conflicts. This is a flat junction. Um, so it introduced so much unreliability into the timetable. So what they should be doing is making it a flying junction, bundle that into quite a lot of takings, but at least as far as I could tell, you're not going to take any of the big condos. You're taking little buildings, not small ones. Um, Again, it's a handful, and some of them are apartment buildings, but not that many. Um, Guessing maybe 50-ish apartments, if that, in Norshell. But guessing, I don't actually know. So again, it's a few tens of millions. My guess is that this is engineering-wise maybe a 200 million project, just by comparison with Herald. Herald was this kind of rail-on-rail grade separation for 250, but that was a much more complex place because it's within the city and this is in the suburbs. And this is also a simpler change, I think. Um, well worth it. This turns what is a forced slowdown, which is again the worst slowdown outside a city. It might even be worse than Frankfurt Junction, which, if this is not in, that is the worst outside the city terminal zone, but it's technically within Philadelphia. This is not in New York. This is the suburbs. New Rochelle is in Westchester, adjacent to the city. Maybe not even adjacent. Maybe I can't actually tell if New Rochelle has any adjacency with the city or if it's just Fallon. Um, but um, but anyway, so this is New York, New Rochelle. And what's the speed limit? What's the speed? Yeah, you can just go 220. Local trains. So I don't think there should be an Acela versus regional distinction in brand or in price. So everything should be charging normal high-speed rail fares, which are again about 15 US cents per kilometer. I like going a little cheaper. First of all, because I think the Northeast Corridor will have lower operating expenses just because it has less peaky travel demand. Just the cities are such locations that there's going to be a bunch of different peaks. So a commute peak, a weekend peak, a day trip peak. Whereas, for example, the TGV is very weekend peak. Or the Shinkansen is very commute peak. And I think then you say, well, combine these so you don't need all of that. But and that means you have lower operating expenses. But more importantly, the main reason, in my entire computations in my spreadsheet, my specific assumption on revenue is designed around the pure numerology. So I recognize this is not fully scientific. The pure numerology of making New York, DC, and New York, Boston, which are 360 kilometers, be $49 one way. You can go lower if you don't care about ever making a profit, if you just want to break even, but then you might have too much traffic, and you might need to just run more trains and sometimes run more capacity. And now here's the thing: from New Rochelle onward, New Rochelle, New Haven is the most annoying part. New Rochelle, New Haven. This is 4 tracks. But you need 3. So I think Amtrak should have again maybe multiple stopping patterns, but no brand differentiation in them, like the way that the TGVs and the ICEs do. I guess there are sprinters here, but other than that, there's no real difference. No real differentiation. The Shinkansen has the different names, but they cost basically the same. I mean, there's a little bit nozomi extra charge to keep the tourists out, but it's so small that I don't think any Japanese citizen care, and any Japanese citizen cares. So I think that local high-speed trains should stop at New Rochelle. Express ones should. but and right now the SLs don't. The regionals do. And here's the problem. So these trains, it's not that much of a problem to slot them with each other, but Metro North becomes a problem because we have three speed classes now. We have high-speed trains, we have express regional trains, express commuter trains, like the ones that go all the way from New Haven and from beyond Stanford in general to New York. Right now, they nonstop from Stanford to Manhattan, so they don't even stop at New Rochelle, for example. Um, and then the local trains from Stanford to New York. So it's three speed classes, but only four tracks. Some people think there should be six tracks. They are wrong. Um, Maybe six track in the far future, together with building new tunnels in New York or something, but don't do it right now. This is again, it's just gratuitous. Just let the trains bypass. Um, so over here, so New Rochelle to, so first of all, let's point out that I am diverging from the line here because this is a little bit too curvy. Between Portchester and the state lines, actually the one of the slowest parts of the Northeast Corridor between Portchester and Greenwich. Um, so this is an I-95 bypass. It requires some takings, but not a lot of takings. Um, so the trains only really share tracks continuously from between New Rochelle and Rye. And remember the commuter trains, the express commuter trains don't stop on this segment. Now, I think that they should be stopping at New Rochelle, which is fine because New Rochelle is where you can reorder the trains. Um, but maybe they should also stop at Portchester and at Greenwich, which are off the bypass. So over here, high-speed trains can actually just overtake express regional trains if they do this. And remember, high-speed trains are not going 300 kilometers an hour. What do my speed zones say? Um, so 31.4 is New Rochelle, and then it's mostly 220. Harrison is 150 at current radius. You can maybe straighten the curves a little bit, but only a little bit. 270, and that's kind of annoying, so maybe you do, maybe you don't. Um, and then you take this bypass at 200. This is not this is going to be an annoying S-curve. Um, so you might notice something that all of these speeds, 220, 170, 200, they're not that much faster than a commuter train. A commuter train goes 160. So there's not a big difference in trip times. So you can actually blend them together. I mean, you can't blend, a train every 2 minutes like this together, but a train every three and a half, you can. I mean, it's something like 10 kilometers together, maybe, between Ryan and New Rochelle. So let's do the pleb way with just the line tool. This is, so if you start diverging from the track, you make sure to diverge before Y because it's a really annoying curve, so you kind of diverge here. Yeah, that's like 12 kilometers. Um, and it's 12, yeah, and it's 12 kilometers where the difference in speed is between, let's say, 160, which, by the way, trains don't do right now. Trains right now do 90 miles an hour, but first of all, they should be doing fast. They should be going at a higher speed. And second, more importantly, if you're speeding these up for high-speed trains, you're also speeding them up for commuter trains. That's not that big a deal. Um, so, so you're doing, again, let's say 12 kilometers and 160 versus maybe 200. Partly 220, partly less. Um, Wait, what did I just do? Yeah, this is less than a minute of difference. So you can very easily blend, let's say, 12 express commuter trains and six high-speed trains per hour. You can even, I mean, so you might need to do some signal modifications, but you can even do maybe 18 express regional and six high-speed. Um, you have something. I mean, you start from being you. If you have a 2 minute, so even with current signaling, you can do 2 minutes between trains. Um, you just don't have much space for recovery. It's just that so technically means 30 trains an hour, but the 1 minute of difference kind of kills that. So with 24, so with 6 and 18, you're allowed 2 minutes of difference, and this is 1 minute. So Um, it's something that you can do. You might need to do signal modifications, but electronics before concrete. This is electronics. Electronics is cheap. Concrete is expensive. Then you go on this 250-kilometer-an-hour bypass. Yes, this means zapping some expensive single-family houses. But here's the thing: at no place are these really expensive houses very densely packed. That's the thing. We're not doing this in the cities. The land values are the highest in the cities because, um, because maybe in a really fancy suburb like in Greenwich, in a suburb like this, maybe this house. I have no idea how much these houses are worth. I'm guessing they're so close to the water. It might well be 3 million each. I'm not sure. Um, the the average might be a million, but or a million and a half. But this is close to the water. These are the most expensive part. Might be three or even more $1 million. But that's fine because look how few houses we're talking about. Um, I mean, there's only so much space you can take for the McMansion. Maybe it's not even McMansion. Maybe it's old enough that these are things that I want to say when rich people had taste, but rich people never had taste. It's just that um, they it's just that the tasteless buildings have been replaced. That's all. Um, so maybe this person gets taken. Maybe only the pool gets taken. I'm not sure. So it's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, maybe 18, 19. Yeah, it's about 20 houses. Um, 20 houses, even in Greenwich, even near the water, that's not going to kill your project. It's like $60 million. Um, the earthworks versus viaducts difference is bigger usually over this distance, right? Because um, especially if you have to go viaduct over a long period. Um, so so you go here, then you drop to near the interstate. And remember, by the way, the ones that are very close to the water might be more expensive. But if you're close to the interstate, that's maybe not the fanciest part because you have an interstate noise next to you. Um, and then you're doing another annoying bridge. This is called the Kozka Bridge or the Miamis River Bridge. So it's the usual thing, straight but with sharp curves. They have these plans to replace it with a high bridge. Unfortunately, the plans fuse the bridge in place, so not like literally not like literally take the movable bridge and fuse it in place. I mean, like they fuse the alignment instead of going for a wider curve. A wider curve that you might notice has, because the biggest differences are over water or near water, you might need to lose a few townhouses. Again, it's for every, I mean, it's always going to be a few houses per place, but it's not a lot. Um, and then you drop back to the old part of Greenwich. Here you can just use the tracks. Um, um, and this is a slow part of the route. It's not that slow. Remember, without doing any of this, New York, New Haven is an hour. With, it's about 40 minutes. So you're saving 20 minutes, and it costs money because you need to build this bypass, which is a pretty big cost. Um, so I used to say $500,000 to do this, because it's going to be mostly elevated. These 7 kilometers. So yeah, probably $500,000 if it's viaducts, maybe even a little bit more, to be honest. Fix the bridge. They say it's $500,000,000. I'm sure it can be done for less. Um, then this is a really annoying curve. You have to just basically carve right away here. So you go near the interstate, then go behind then zap some houses here, and then this is the part where the Darien NIMBYs really got pissed at when I drew this line. So the people in this area are roughly aware of my alignment up to Green's Farms, which is here, because that was the biggest magic asterisk in the official plan. And they asked me, and I just told them straight out, this is where you can't have, this is where you can't avoid impact. This is where you can. So here, yeah, just you're carving right of way through Norton Heights. These people will also feel oppressed because this is very rich by any non-Darien standards, but it's actually the less rich part of Darien. This is where the butlers used to live. And of course, their fourth generation descendants are very wealthy, but they pretend like they're working class. The really wealthy people live here. Um, and and you can kind of see it, it's like way less dense, for example, in this part. Um, but so okay, let's say it's 1 million or 2 million, perhaps. That's fine. I mean, this is I haven't done so. This is a large enough number that a count will not be precise at this point. My guess is this is about 50, 50-ish houses, just the stretch. Which is again, it's money, but it's not infinite money. Um, it's definitely worth it to do this and not have to deal with tight curves here. And here you just have a 250 km/h alignment. Then everything is mostly commercial. Um, this would have been a lot easier if they hadn't built Avalon here, but okay. But instead of Avalon, okay, you're zapping again a few houses at a time. Often houses are rather close to the freeway, so these people think that they're fancy because they snagged a single family house in a suburb where the black population, I believe, is less than 1%. But it's not actually objectively fancy, it's polluted. Um, so it's not going to be 10 million houses, $10 million per house, it's going to be like two. Um, you keep doing this. And again, it's a few per suburb, maybe low two digits per suburb, except Darien where it's mid two digits. You keep doing this, the occasional bypass. It's not that hard. By the way, my guess for the so I used to cost these, and I will eventually have to recost these in 2020's numbers, not mid 2000s. This is about 16 kilometers. This is 15, but it's 16. Um, I used to say a billion. I think it's more. It's maybe a billion and a half. Um, and then again, it's just the same thing. Bypass a little bit of impact, but not much. You always try to zap the things that are in the way of fixing the worst curves. This is industrial. Um, this is a tunnel. So the only actual tunnel that is necessary is here, because you can do a bridge, but a bridge over a river and in an urban center, the footprints of the not the foot the the landings of the bridge, not the foot. There's not a word of foot and feet. The landings of the bridge are going to be probably more expensive than a tunnel. Um, and then you emerge here, and again, it's always a few houses you take, not a lot. Um, I doubt you're breaching 1,000 for the entire line, Boston to DC. Um, Hypothetically speaking, if tunneling at Spanish/Nordic costs were possible, wouldn't it make sense to go with a tunnel over getting rid of all these expensive houses? No. Um, Tunnels in Spain are not free. Tunnels in Spain are cheap. They're not free. Um, and so even it's only, I mean, if these houses had the average cost of Atherton, which is 7 million, then maybe. But for the most part, it's stuff near freeways. So no. Um, I mean, there's a limit to how much you can actually affordably satisfy SNAP-based. And by the way, the United States has high tunneling costs, but the main problems with high-speed rail are not high unit costs. The problems are they just have all these gratuitous structures, these gratuitous houses, gratuitous tunnels. It's very visible in California, for example. And again, same thing, by the way, Melford again, little straightenings. This is probably the most blatant, but you might want to shave a row of houses here. So New York, New Haven is doable this way in 40 minutes. So these couple billion, again, it's mostly it's mostly three bypasses, which are around Rye and Portchester Branch, Darien, Norwalk, and then Bridgeport, Stratford, where this requires a tunnel. I think all of them together might be 3-4 bill, and that saves 20 minutes. It's fine. I mean, it also gives you more capacity. I mean, it's not that important. I mean, the capacity thing is especially useful for this bypass. Less so east of Stamford, because east of Stamford, this is a 4-track line, but there's never any reason to run express commuter trains. They run express commuter trains because they don't know how to timetable, but they can just run express intercities or just go nonstop. They shouldn't just stop at Bridgeport. New Haven, Stanford, maybe even New Haven, New York, nonstop, uh, and then and then local and then regional trains that do New Haven to Stanford, and then start skipping some stops. Not running nonstop. Again, the Metro North Express trains from Stanford to Manhattan, I think, should still stop Greenwich, Portchester, and North Shore. Um, and then you go east. This is the part that um, everyone thinks is really hard, and it's actually really easy. So this is the kind of speculative part because you do need to do demolitions within New Haven. It's areas that were already kind of demolished already. This is for urban renewal or industrial land. Um, if you're relying on good working class jobs in New Haven, they're not here. Okay, they're not. Um, they're being a barista at Blue State Coffee at this point. Um, so um, um, so instead of doing whoop, you go direct, and then you can just go nuts on speed along I-95. I keep not being sure about going south or north, and here it's north then south. Um, and as usual, this looks like it's a fully pre-impacted corridor. It's not. I mean, there's always a little bit of stuff near the freeway that needs to be demolished because this is supposed to be a 360 kilometers an hour alignment. This is actually a really good example. So I see this, and I see that this needs to go, and I see, okay, this looks maybe a townhouse. Wait, but townhouses never have their own swimming pool. This is a hotel. This is a cheap hotel by the roadside. Um, Now, I don't remember how many rooms it has. I did look it up. I believe it's 65 rooms. Now, what I know now, so let's pretend that I know the name of the hotel, which I did, and I know how many stars it is, which I also did. I believe it's 3, and it has 65 rooms. And I know, of course, in real estate, we know the 3 most important things are location, location, and location. So we know that the location is off an off ramp to the freeway somewhere east of New Haven. Um, so we know that the location is kind of meh, and we know that it's 65 rooms, and we can play Bush Consultant because I mean, this is something that you're literally asked at an interview when you're doing entry-level business work, right? I mean, you know how when you interview for companies, um, they sometimes ask you kind of questions, not just about what you did at previous jobs, but to see how smart you are, how good you are at the job. And in tech, that would be the whiteboarding interview, for example. That's kind of how it evolved from Microsoft, from 1980s Microsoft to early 21st century Google. And I think everyone else, and I think that the whiteboarding is mostly people copying Google and not copying the things that Google copied, but like older Microsoft things. But I mean, so in the same way that in tech you have whiteboarding, um, in generic business, they ask you these kind of generic business analyst type questions, and so they never ask you about this because this is an example that I saw in a real world environment, namely trying to estimate the cost of the takings because these are residential takings. They're near a freeway. I know it's a suburb of New Haven that is unlikely to be extremely exclusive because I know what the extremely exclusive suburbs are because I hear these suburbs complain about things. Um, so here it's so maybe this is going to be more expensive. So the real question is how much will the owner sell for? And again, the owner has an MBA, almost certainly. I have no idea what the name of the owner is. It's not my job to do the negotiation. I would suck at the negotiation. I'm really bad at negotiating pay, by the way. Um, Please employ me. I'm going to be bad at negotiating high salary. Um, Sorry, but but the point is, um, this is kind of the Bush business analysis or Bush consulting thing, where you can just look at this and make an estimate. They ask you to do these Bush estimations at phone interviews or in-person interviews for consulting or business analysis type jobs. I believe the answer with the normal multiplier on from revenue to value is $10 million for this hotel. And and again, I'm not submitting this in part of as part of some dossier or as part of some uh, as some application materials for work. This is just a real world example of. I mean, if you're in tech, you might have. I think in tech they like asking you to reverse a linked list, right? Um, um, I don't think the headhunters care, right? The headhunter doesn't care how bad you are at negotiation. The boss cares how bad you are at negotiation. But I believe if I believe the headhunters are contracted out. Um, but anyway, um, the headhunters get paid flat based on the hire. So I think so. This is again about 10 million. So not a lot of money. Dealing with the annoyance of what is likely going to be a viaduct like this is going to be possibly more expensive because this is a viaduct over the highway and over the is this an overpass or an underpass? I mean, it still requires a viaduct. So probably something like a kilometer of viaduct. That's probably like $50 million possibly of civils. Um, and then you go back at grade, and then everything's really cheap. Um, and then whenever you hit a freeway interchange, that's when things get kind of annoying. But if it's just one street and it's an exit, then it's a not even really suburban. I don't like calling this kind of layout suburban. Basically, this is almost rural. Like this is suburban. This isn't. Um, so you go around here, a few takings, not many. I know there's been a lot of noise from Old Lime about this. That is a fancy place. Greg Stroud, who paid me to write, not this, the 30-30-30 is feasible thing. I mean, he didn't pay me to write the conclusion. He paid me to, he paid me to look at this and report that and my conclusions were that it is feasible. Um, he complained about the Northeast Corridor future process, and then everyone thinks it's intractable because they gave him a tunnel, but they didn't give him a tunnel. They replaced shelf art that said elevated with shelf art that said tunnel. They didn't give anything. This was not an active project. They knew they weren't going to get funded for the triple-digit billions they were asking for. So, um, at any rate, um, they are they had three complaints. So the first is that I'm drawing an I-95 bypass of everything. Northeast Corridor Future didn't because this is not as slow. So this is kind of curvy. This line, I think it's actually curvier than west of New Haven. The average speed is higher because they have more super elevation and no Metro North interference. Um, but um, but it is kind of curvy and it's bypassable and much less developed, much straighter I-95 than west of New Haven. So why not? Um, but the real curviness starts when you cross the Connecticut, and also this is the first of the really annoying movable bridges. Um, in fact, the worst of them because the Coast Guard insists that shipping traffic has priority because the river came first. It's actually consistent. The who came first rule when it's ships versus trains. It's only cars that get to jump the queue. So in the Cape Cod Canal, because it's not a natural waterway, it is a canal. It matters what came first. The railway actually has priority because the railway was built before the canal. And they might still complain, but legally the railway has priority. Um, and now the actual use of the canal is exclusively by boating traffic because this was never a busy shipping channel. Now, I'm going to shit on Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs has this argument that location is not important for cities. As evidence, she says, well, you would expect that New England's biggest city should be at the mouth of its biggest river, the Connecticut. But Old Saybrook is nothing. Um, Instead, the biggest city of New England is Boston. Now, the reality is that this was a sandbar all this time, and therefore it didn't have any shipping. Jane Jacobs is really good at saying things that um, always miss this really important historical detail. Um, and because she never has references in her work, because it's popular, people don't actually people can't actually easily follow through and see that she's wrong. So this used to be a sandbar. There was Army Corps of Engineers that cleared it. So now it is usable by shipping traffic, but it is not necessary. But because who needs that? It's not a very big river, the Connecticut. Um, not but by the standards of the 20th century. Um, and the industrial economy had already oriented itself. However, this is a movable bridge. It's not very fast, very sharp curves, and there's a limit to how many trains can run there because of this Coast Guard bullshit with the boating traffic. So to the point that this is one of the very few places where Amtrak, maybe the only one where Amtrak accepts commuter rail tickets, because most commuter trains only go as far as Old Saybrook. I think only one round trip a day goes to New London because there are limits to how many trains can cross the bridge. Even doing an hourly clock face schedule on it might be no. Hourly clock face should be fine. Half hourly is going to be the difficult one, I guess. But because of that, they decided to start the bypass from Old Saybrook. So the idea is the trains go floop floop floop. Here around Old Saybrook, they would diverge and run on I-95. And I believe the idea was to go whoop south of I-95, um, do this kind of sweeping curve that um, takes parts of the marina and then go here and start on the other. I won't say start on the other old lime NIMBYs, but it's just Stroud really. Um, has three complaints. First is this transition, as proposed, somehow passes through wetlands. Um, Second, damage to the marina. Third, the plan lands not as I draw north of I-95 but south, so that would be a loud 360 kilometers an hour train, close to the historic center of Brookline, which is not actually close because this is the historic center, this is the school, this is where the train would go. Now, three of these three complaints, one of these completely goes away if you just build an I-95 the entire way. The other mostly goes away if you build north. The marina is the one that is intractable, but I mean, it's a marina, get a better hobby. Or get a boat that is south of I-95 and not north of it. Um, so again, much more tractable than people think. Even when you have divergences, again, they're mostly in unbuilt areas or in very little built areas. Here might need some cut and fill, but this is not actually a big hill. This is a really big river. This is a really big bridge that you might need. I think at one point I liked crayoning that the new deck to be built should actually be a freeway bridge, and then the middle deck, so this would be the westbound, should be used for high-speed rail just to keep the trains between the freeway decks. But that was under the assumption that the train is louder than the freeway, which I don't think is actually true, even at 320 kilometers an hour. Then again, maybe here you have a few takings. Here you might even be able to some extent to go in the median, although not fully. I don't think you can go here and maintain curve radius is a problem, but not a huge problem. But a few places you can. And then here, there's nothing here. I mean, infinitesimal takings just to transition back to the fast parts of the Northeast Corridor, Rhode Island. This curve might need stretching or not, I'm not sure. You might need to do some rebuilds in Providence for curves, I'm not sure either. This is a really annoying part. This is a place where it looks at this does not look that curvy, but it kind of is. And Pawtucket is especially annoying, and I drew this as a slight divergence, this curve, but you might need a bigger divergence. And yes, this involves taking houses in Pawtucket. Pawtucket land values are not high. Maybe near the river there, I'm not sure. But it's more intact. It's not like you're demolishing a house that is kind of tucked away between a freeway and a freight rail spur. Is not really central to the neighborhood. This might be higher neighborhood impact, or maybe not. I mean, this is not. It's not that many houses. Um, at this point, so that would be Providence, Boston. Um, this is about 190 kilometers an hour for this. You might need to go down to 160 or something, um, but it, but it's not that big. Actually, wait, no, this is 100. Let me actually. Again, this is because I don't remember the speed zone. So this is. Oh no, this is 140. That is the issue. Okay. So this is this curve at the station itself is 80. Then you're 140. Then you're 190. Then this is the curve that controls you to 190. It's the Boston switch curve. And now you're 320. Now you have commuter trains here and only two tracks. Amtrak, in its infinite wisdom, wants a triple track from Boston Switch all the way to the Canton Viaduct. This is unnecessary. Um, you just timetable them. You electrify the commuter trains, which the T is already looking at. The main problem right now is um, the main barrier to electrification is the pettiest stuff ever at this point. It's that they want to do it at pilot project scale. So just the Fairmount line, which is whip, and the Providence line, which is actually red thing, Boston to Providence, which is already wired. They're running diesel trains under catenary and have for 20 years. As I said, infinite wisdom. But the um, but the upshot is that this is not. It's not that big of a fleet. Maybe eight-ish train sets. I think. I think from Boston to Providence. I guess maybe with Stoughton it's a couple more. But it's not a very big fleet, so they don't want to do an entirely new order, especially because they're worried about Buy America, new factory, so they want to piggyback off an order. But it has to be an American order because they think they will get federal funding even for something that's literally 8 train sets or 10 train sets. Um, so they're worried about so now they're looking at American orders and they don't exist because the only good one is the KISS for Caltrain, and the KISS for Caltrain was stretched up to fit the dimensions of Western United States trains, which are much more generous. Uh, this was a stretch, and this involves a lot of bad consultant input. But instead of just buying a horizontally stretched version, so not trains that are 2 meters 90 but 320, but the same height as in Europe. But so instead of getting that for this line, they want to get a piggyback off the Caltrain, which doesn't quite fit because the east coast of the US um, has something called Plate B um, loading gauge, whereas the western US has Plate F. Um, Sometimes even Plate H, which is double stacked freight, but this is Plate B, which is slightly taller than a European train. So an European train will fit here very easily, even if you build wire under low bridges, which do exist, but they're American low bridges, not British low bridges. And so the European trains will fit here very easily, but they're worried about importing even at pilot scale. And if it's not at pilot scale, then you need to convince the governor to do a big project for a technology that is completely normal and completely vanilla and completely proven, but not in the United States. And the governor thinks that the world is flat. And if you go past the Boston, Seattle, San Diego, Miami quadrilateral, you will fall off and die. I mean, it's a bit different business culture. A German manager does not sound like an American manager, does not talk like an American manager, does not know American managers. Um, so this is why this is not being done, but it's at that level of pettiness. It's not even they say no. It's they're trying, but they are still beholden to weird assumptions, to weird assumptions, and um, and so so if you electrify the trains, so at Alabor you already have 4 tracks. This is a 4-track segment. In fact, one of the one of two places where you need to actually do extra wiring because only the middle tracks are electrified. The commuter rail sidings at Alabama aren't. And Pawtucket Yard is the other. So the rail yard that is used for the Providence line here, it's called Pawtucket Yard. It's not electrified either because they're diesel trains. It's very little electrification. It's basically free. Um, so you use the 4-track segment here to schedule an overtake, which we didn't write about in the regional rail docs for transit matters because we are not assuming Amtrak will be competent in these documents. But if necessary, this can be modified very easily. So you keep this, and then the speed difference. Remember, these are trains that make all these stops, the commuter trains, so Attleboro, Mansfield, Sharon, Canton Junction, Route 128, and they should go maybe 160 kilometers an hour in between, and the intercity trains should be going 320, maybe even 360 until they hit the viaduct. The viaduct is about 1 degree, so it's 1700. I'm not going to draw the. Actually, maybe I should. It's about 1746. But I know. I mean, so remember in MBTA land, I actually have exact curve radii in degrees, which is what American railroaders think in terms of, but not too difficult to convert. So you see 1745, so basically 1 degree, and you see it perfectly fits. So this is 230 kilometers an hour. Now this will annoy the occasional freight train because the freight train will be at Kent access, but passenger trains at 160, let's look. So this is 1746, 200 millimeters of super elevation. This is the balancing. So the balancing speed is going to be 173. So commuter trains are going to be at slight, and I emphasize slight, Kant access, which is fine. Remember, Kant access and Kant efficiency are symmetric. Some regulations treat them differently for kind of silly reasons, or more specifically, so this is going to be 30 millimeters Kant access, which is basically nothing. I mean, it's like, again, this is symmetric with Kant efficiency. The reason regulations sometimes treat them differently is that Kant efficiency typically applies to passenger trains, and Kant access typically is for freight trains, and freight trains can't have too much Kant access because they are much top heavier. Diesel locomotives are very top heavy. Now 30 millimeters, nobody gives it down. But if it's, let's say, 150 millimeters Kant access, then it's rather bad for diesel. I mean, freight might shift is the problem. The diesel locomotives can do about up to 6 inches to about 150 millimeters Kant access or deficiency. Again, they're very top heavy diesel locomotives, even more so than, let's say, bi-level cars. But electrics don't care, even if it's electric locomotives. There is some freight on this line, but there's very little. They can just tell the Providence and Worcester to speed up to some extent. And so it's not that big of a deal to deal with viaduct, and then you're 230. Then within Boston, you have to slow down because there's a limit to how much noise they can do in Boston. But also, this line is kind of curvy here. And it turns out that at these speeds, it's about 15 minutes of difference in travel time between Attleboro and about Route 128 or Reedville, between a regional train that makes all these stops and an intercity train that just cruises and does not stop at Route 128. So that's great because if the train should be running every 15 minutes, then that's your 2 overtakes. You time an overtake at Attleboro. The next overtake will be at somewhere between Route 128 and Reedville. So instead of doing this long triple track segment, you go whoop. I mean, you can see the circle tool, but no, I'll just do a line tool. From whoop to whoop. It's about 4 kilometers. And actually the 4 tracks stay, you can keep 4 tracking up all the way up to Forest Hills. It's a very wide right of way that was expropriated for a freeway. It's just that they never built the freeway because of a freeway revolt. And instead, they built the Southwest Corridor. So they made this park and they rerouted the Orange Line. It's this kind of forward-thinking project. The Orange Line was an L over Washington Street. Um, and you can see that between here, the street network is such a mess that this is very close, even though technically they're parallel. Over here, they're very close. So Green Street's just the same thing, but over here, it's very different. A lot of walking from, let's say, Stony Brook or Jackson Square to any of the old station locations. Also, this is where black people live. This is white people in Jamaica Plain. Um, they told the black residents of Roxbury that it's okay, they're going to get BRT. BRT is as good as a subway. The BRT goes on Washington up to Dudley, which is here. It is a very busy bus. It is also a very congested bus because the bus lanes are actually the double parking lanes, and the bus lanes vanish when they enter downtown Boston because the streets are too narrow and the cars always come first. Um, there's a reason why people call Boston racist. And so the and so up until here they have the Orange Line and the triple track, uh, the triple track main line. Over here, the main line stays triple track, but they can expand it to four if they really don't, if they really need to, which I don't think they do, but they can make this triple track easily up to Forest Hills, not including, unfortunately. Um, but so they can do, but again, don't triple track when you don't have to. Just triple track this part, um, and do this overtake, and then at one of these, probably Reedville is better for the train to dwell a little bit, and then maybe exchange traffic with Fairmount, with the Fairmount line, um, and then Boston, um, where again it's always you speed the slowest segments. You can so right now trains are supposed to take 5 minutes between South Station and Back Bay, but they don't need to. I mean, you can do this to this in about one, maybe three if they stop at Back Bay. If they don't stop at Back Bay, it's like 1.5 or two, if that. And three is rounded, kind of the is a rounding artifact. It's more like 2.5. The trains here are slowed down to 10 miles an hour because of some signaling bullshit, and because they think that they need to slow down to 10 miles an hour for bumper trucks, they don't. You can do 50 kilometers an hour easy, maybe even 60 or 70. Um, this curve is good for 70 if you super elevate it. Remember, there's an interlocking, but the interlocking is not here. The interlocking is here. And there should be north-south railing for the commuter trains anyway. So this is the northeast corridor. This is where it should be done. Again, always the slowest segment. So you can save between South Station and Back Bay. If you stop at both of them, you can still save something like 2.5 minutes. And it's not even expensive 2.5 minutes. Yeah, you need to rebuild the interlocking, but first of all, it also helps commuter trains tremendously. And second, that's $20 million, maybe. Yes, they would be better off not getting federal funding. Um, the in general in the United States, unless you're a small city, federal funding costs you more in federal red tape than it saves you. It's just that they have a lot of learned helplessness, so they think in terms of other people's money. So they always think in terms of what outside sources of funding they can get for projects, even when the strings attached cost more than they save. Um, Again, it's a lot of learned helplessness. It's a lot of sheer incompetence. A lot of just unwillingness to even try. So just so that you know, Buy America used to have an escape clause. I mean, legally it still does. Buy America is a 25% tariff. Buy America means that you can get an import if the American equivalent costs 25% more or more, which in this case it does. But you need to ask permission. Agencies were loath to ask permission because governors always say we will create jobs. State legislatures always say we will create jobs in my district. The number of jobs created is basically nothing. And yes, the escape clause is just effectively dead because yeah, this is what it was talking about. Yeah, the escape clause died peacefully in the Obama-Trump transition and has not been revived in the Trump-Biden transition. And so the And so yeah, so it's not like Massachusetts can say, okay, we're not seeking federal funding. Why? Because we want to import. Because even when there's no way the trains are going to be made in Massachusetts anyway, um, someone's going to complain. And these are not people who are used to telling people no. These are people who are used to say this isn't. These are people who are used to say we will form a committee and check this for you, and then sandbagging. They're not used to saying no, you're wrong. Especially they're not used to saying no, you're wrong to someone who cosplays as an important member of the community and is not going to ever win an election against them. Um, but but again, it's just very traditional, very kind of traditional. I don't say traditional in like religious sense. I mean traditional in the sense of um, people who, like the sort of person you expect to be the manager. So again, usually it's a straight white guy, straight white American guy. But not in, let's say in black neighborhoods, it's going to be someone who's like that but black. Um, like there is the black equivalent of this, or the black woman equivalent of this, who is again going to be someone who's generally never going to say, "Oh, this is how things are done in Germany." Um, it's always going to be, "Oh, my community has different needs." It's always going to be something very local, always about kind of local joking, about local joking, local jockeying for funds, because that's not threatening. It's kind of it's what I call the it's what I call Ariadarization from Ariadari, the leader of Shas. Um, so it's um so it's just so it's obviously possible. They just are very unimaginative about it. So what captures their imagination? The promise of a high speed with funky looking train noses. So they think in terms of top speed, and not in terms of how to speed up the South Station approaches, how to um, make sure the trains can actually go at 80 kilometers an hour as soon as they speed out of the Providence Station throughout, how to um, timetable express, intercity, and local commuter trains on the same tracks based on how much traffic they're planning on running, things like that. They never think in those terms. They never think. They never think in terms like. So, by the way, I'm pretty sure that nobody has ever looked at this alignment. Unfortunately, I know that people have looked at an alignment that goes traditional and then looks at I-95. It's at I-95. I know Penn designed it, but I don't think Penn Design, for example, ever did this, because from Penn Design's perspective, you're trying to build a high-speed bypass. Why are you trying to build a high-speed bypass through New Haven when, I mean, compare how long this is and how long this is. Like this is like I think a 2 kilometer saving. Show elevation profile. So starting from Union Station to, let's say where the two lines intersect, not when they not when the meeting would be, because it's at an angle. So it's 4.8 kilometers, and let's try to do the same thing on the trad line. So it's here. So remember 4.8. This is with the bypass that involves the bridge over the Quinnipiac. It's money. It's like what, $500 million. Not just the bridge, everything. Like these 4.8 kilometers, probably 500 mil. This. So no, we're going as far as the intersection point. So 4.8 versus 9.4. So this is a difference of about 4.5 kilometers, which are not to be done at high speed. Look at this curve. Okay, look at this curve. It might even need to fit. So it's not a. So don't get me wrong. Okay, 960 meters is not terribly tight. These are tighter, and yet we're talking about something that's maybe 160 kilometers an hour. I'm not even going to compute this. I'm going to pretend it's the same. It's not. You can go faster. Um, so this is 4.5 kilometers at 160. This is 1.7 minutes. This saves you more time than, even on the most optimistic assumptions, the uh, catenary thing, the catenary rebuild that Amtrak just opened between New Brunswick and Trenton. Cost probably about the same. But again, it saves you more than that because it's not 160. This is more because New Haven to because this almost immediately can be done after the so after this curve it can be done at 230, so it's faster, and this is slower than 160, I think. Um so overall, so it's 1.7, but it's actually um gonna 1.7 minutes, but then um 3.8 out of the 4.8 kilometers are not to be done at 160 but at 230, so that is another zero point 0.4 minutes. So at this point, we're something like 2 minutes, 2.1 minutes ahead of timetable. And maybe here, this is faster than 160, but I don't think so. Look at this curve. And this is a little slower. So yeah, it could be, this may well be something like saving 2.5 or even possibly maybe 3 minutes. I'm skeptical this is 3, but 2.5, sure. Um, so this is not thought of as high speed because it's converting low speed to medium speed. Um, Again, a lot of this is just lack of imagination, lack of understanding of what really makes high speed rail tech. Um, Definitely never having looked at any kind of throw diagram as a modern station, so something like Stuttgart 21, Berlin Hauptbahnhof. Um, it's just like the reason this is not done is mostly that that requires imagination and requires thinking like it's the 2020s and not the 1950s, and American railroaders, and unfortunately also so many American activists um, think like it's the 1950s. Like they think like they're trying to block. They think that they like suing. They like suing to block road projects rather than defeating lawsuits to rapidly build rail projects. Um, and this is a giant problem. Okay, like the entire activist class in the United States is just bad at doing high speed relay. Anything involves this level of coordination, they're bad at. Um, and again, it's not because it's illegal or something. There are always ways to get around. It's just that they don't think that they should get around by America by, for example, not asking for federal funds. Um, or they don't think that they can just tell a local notable, no, we're doing a taking next to your house. Um, Even when they would win the lawsuit, even when they know that the lawsuit would delay them by 6 months on a 5-year project, and they would win. Anyway, I'm kind of done with describing this, so if there are questions, go and ask, and I hope to be done at 9, is 8:52. Um, so if you have any questions, shoot. Do I think that China viol maybe? I mean, I was told in comments that they like that because they're faster to build than at grade. Um, but but the thing is, at grade crossings, so don't get me wrong, in very dense suburban areas, it's kind of unavoidable, but not in the sort of rural areas where China is building all these viaducts. Um, and conversely, look over here. I mean, this is in theory dense, but it's dense at a certain zoom level, which is not the zoom level that is relevant here. So over here, you do not actually need to cross the freeway very much. Um, you sometimes have a trail. Okay, whatever. I mean, just build a trail through the berm. Like you can do all of this on earthworks. Um, I mean, if you have a complex grade separation, then maybe not. But normally, you can just do all of this on earthworks with berms and such. Like my guess is the reason that China loves viaducts is that it saw them in Japan. Um, Are there any? Does that answer your question? First of all, also love your username. It's thanks Bernanke, right? Like it's one of these. Um, it's one of these Twitter neoliberal, yeah, names. By the way, does anyone else, or do you maybe have more questions? Yeah, no, I remember like the neoliberal meme group when like I recently saw the history of it on Twitter where apparently the issue is that r slash bad economics on Reddit. There's something called R1 rule one, which is that anything you post you must actually provide your own explanation for why it's bad economics at the undergraduate economics major level. So people who want to just dunk and not have to explain how something is actually wrong decide to form their own meme group, and they figure out that r slash neoliberal was available. So remember they had these Bernanke. Yeah, so they have these like like pics of like their favorite neoliberals, like Merkel and Macron, who literally required the European party that he joined to change its name to avoid the word liberal, which in France roughly means eats babies. This is why it's called Renew Europe, and they didn't keep the old ALDE name, Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Um, and Bernanke is one of these. Yeah, I mean, you know this. I'm just telling it to other people or to video watchers. And because it's people who are mostly geriatric millennials rather than actual boomers on uh, basically everything else it's the same as on like trans rights are the same as DSA. Is the current gateway alignment as bad for trip times as it looks? What do you mean the gateway alignment? Like the gateway alignment, I mean, yes, there's a little bit of a curve there. I mean, so something that always bothered me, I still don't know why. I don't think it's terribly important. It grates my it just grates my OCD that it's not just parallel and a neat separation. I think for weird reasons of redundancy, they wanted this spaced away from the old tunnels under river. So it's going something like this. Um, but I don't think it matters very much for trip time. I haven't seen the curve radius in a lot of detail. Also, it doesn't really matter because I don't think that Amtrak should be using that tunnel because the new tunnel, the way it enters Penn Station, it has to enter Penn Station's southernmost tracks, and these are exactly the tracks that can hit that currently stop ends of the tracks that should get the tunnel to Grand Central, and Amtrak should not be going to Grand Central. So even though Amtrak should get the tunnel with even though ideally you want Amtrak to get the newer tunnel um, with the more free air around the trains, in practice, Amtrak should just stick to the old tunnels, not run at 200, but at 150, 160 with um, with long noses to avoid too much of a sonic boom. Um, Separately, I also think that this speed is also perfectly cromulent on this alignment. But again, I haven't looked at detailed drawings or anything, but nothing there looks terribly curvy. Um, which New is this the Nikolai or the Dan New York? So for people who don't know, New York EMB, the publication, kind of brought the word EMB into America, but is not an EMB activist group, even though it did employ Stephen Smith and Becca Bergampa. Um, it's just a real estate magazine that kind of had a fallout between two people, Nikolai. Is this Nikolai or is this? This would be Nikolai. Nikolai and Dan. So there was New York EMB and EMB News, and this was actually well covered in the New York real estate media at the time. Um, but at this point, it's just uh, real estate and the actual EMB group in New York is called Open New York. They're not even using the EMB name. Yeah, so this does not look especially curvy to me. So this curve, maybe, I don't know. Again, hard to tell at this resolution, or rather hard to tell without the Google Earth tool in front of me. Um, so like I can't tell whether I mean this curve like at, let's say, this resolution, where I'm drawing with the mouse, this does not look curvier than this, and this is 160. Um, maybe maybe this curve is sharper than I think it is. But again, nothing there obviously screams very tight. But again, Amtrak should not do this. Amtrak should do this. Um, yeah, so the low floor aspect of the telcos is really good if you're Europe and you have a giant installed base of 550 millimeter platforms. The United States has literally zero such platforms. The United States has either 8-inch or even less than that platforms, which you never have level boardings to because there's just the cells at the bottom of the train are never are going to be more than that. Um, I think the lowest viable boarding height is about 400 millimeters, give or take, maybe 380 actually, so not 200. Or so in America, you're either that or you're high, which is which is about which is in America it's 4 feet. It's, I think, one a meter 22, I guess, which is the standard high-speed rail ride, not right height. Remember, China, Japan, Taiwan are all high platform world. Um, I think India will be too. So it's so they use a meter 25 as their main height. So all of the international export products are a meter 25. Yes, a completely new high-speed rail network in Europe would use 760 millimeter platforms. Um, but the vendors know this, and at this point, I think Stadler has a 250 millimeter, 250 kilometers an hour product that is 760 millimeters. By the way, no, European trains are not incompatible with a meter 25. That is false. So you might need to do a little bit of stretching for the commuter trains because the commuter trains have been recently, and I emphasize recently, designed to level board to 550 or 760. However, first of all, the legacy S-Bahns have high platforms, and not just legacy. The Munich S-Bahn is 960. Um, and so so the S-Bahns are perfectly good for this. Even though, again, most of the newer S-Bahns just started to do level boarding to low platforms. No, this is not true. The Velarde is not incompatible. On the contrary, the Velarde has 125 roughly meter floor height. It does have stairs built into it, but you take that train, you don't have stairs there, um, and then you call it the Velaro CN, and that's the train, and the and that's one of the export products sold to China. China I believe it's one of the ones that China likes and copied and made its own version of, together with its Zafira, which is basically the same thing but made by Bombardier. Um, so they absolutely do have stuff for the meter 25 for the high platform world. It was not. It's not a. Remember the intercity trains here. Because Europe hates disabled people, the intercity trains here don't have level boarding. The regional trains generally do, but the intercity trains generally don't. Even, by the way, the double duck TGVs don't. They're actually a step down from a low platform. So the platforms are 550 and the floors, I believe, 380. Um, because otherwise, I don't think they would fit in the French loading gauge, the TGV duplexes. Um, but the but no, the trains here absolutely do get modded for high platforms all the time. It's very normal. It's I don't think it was difficult to modify for the Chinese market. Um, the the modifications for S-Bahns in some legacy cases with high platforms, again, they're pretty normal. Britain is, I believe, going to do meter high platforms for high speed 2, and this is completely vanilla for Europe. Like the standard boarding, so the platform height again is low, but the floor height is high. Oh, international travel with existing trains within Euroland. I mean, yeah, so you would need something that boards to 550 because of France, unfortunately. France is never changing to 760. That's the big problem is the 550, not the 760. 760, I mean, so disability laws are getting tighter, and I expect that eventually Euroland will be able to have level boarding to 760 with so a single deck EMU level boarding 760 millimeter, capable of not just 250, which Stadler can do. I mean, it's technically 249 for regulatory reasons, but 249 and 250 are the same up to 1 kilometers an hour, 1 kilometer an hour. S is plural, one is singular. Um, but so the day when they start doing things that are for 300, 320 is, I don't think it's a long thing. I think it's actually a decently safe bet about the future of the technology here. Um, but 550 I think is harder. Um, I don't know to what extent 550 is feasible with this. No, it's not. No, they will still have to worry about open access. I mean, if they do 125, so first of all, the TSI says that all new platforms should be 550 or 760. Second of all, if France thinks that going from 550 to 1 meter 25 is going to protect it from open access, I think it's wrong. Because remember, it's easier because first of all, if it does 1 meter 25, it needs to redesign the TGV duplex. The whole point of the TGV duplex is there's no split level, so it's not split. So normally bilevels here are split level, like in America. Let me see if I can find. Yeah, so Stadler Kiss. Um, and let's see if they have. Yeah, so this is a split level. So when I say split level, low level, high level, but in between the cars, it's mid level. Now you board to the low level. Now this is a recent level boarding innovation. The older trains that don't have level boarding in Zurich, which do exist still, by the way, um, make you climb stairs to the split level on the sides with triple wide doors. Um, but the TGV duplexes are not split level. The TGV duplex, and I really hope that I'm going to be able to find a good photo. Yeah, okay. So this is the TGV duplex. This is not split level. This is full bi-level. In America, the equivalent of this is the superliner, which is absurdly high. I think you need a minimum of a plate F for it, so nothing that touches the Northeast Corridor can run a superliner. So you board to the low level, and then you move between cars on the high level. Um, and and so this is um, so, um, so this needs to be fully redesigned to be split level if they want to have high platforms. So it does not. So remember, the number one country in Europe that is trying to get over to get not over to get around the open access mandate, France, specifically has captive rolling stock that is so core to it that its previous attempt to screw over open access was to charge operators by the car rather than by the seat, because these are bi-levels, so more seats per car, until the European courts told it that they can't do that, that this is discrimination. So so France can't do this. France can't do 125 unless it wants to scrap this and replace it with this product, um, which I think it should. I think the Velara is a superior product with the TGV. Um, and then maybe instead of having trains that doors that wrap this far down, the doors would only go as far as here, and there would just not be steps. But that's what Germany should be doing, and again, what France should be doing, because France should take the really high speed trains, the really high speed infrastructure, and then have German style operations. But they're not thinking this way. And it's not going to, and again, it's not a protection from open access, because if France tries doing that, then it's easier to do this. Then all Germany needs to do is have these trains, um, have some sort of automatic traps. So in America, they have these traps, these trapdoors, where the trapdoors are compatible with both high platforms and low platforms. So if the trapdoor is closed, then you board at a high platform, and then you can open the trapdoor and reveal the stairs for very low platforms. Um, and all of these are manually operated by conductors, but it is possible to do it automatically. I think I've seen a video of that in Korea. I've never been on a train in Korea. I've never been in Korea. Um, yes, this does mean that all of what I know about the GSL code S is from watching videos, not from having actually been there. Not that I've been to like IAM Katowice or any of the European tournaments. Um, but the but I have seen videos of these automatic traps. So this is something that on a single level or a split level train is a very easy modification. I mean, easy in I mean, you still need to research it, you still need to test this, but it is something that is already in existence. Not even in Japan, in Korea, where the rolling stock follows more stringent regulations, I believe, than Europe on buff strength and such. And so this is not something that is hard to get around to get around protectionism by regulation. Oh, the Korean high-speed trains. Um, yes, let me actually see the fleet because I don't actually know what. So I know the old fleet. Uh, yeah. Types of trains. Oh, you mean the semi-high speeds? Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So these are the TGV derivatives, but so I do not know to what extent. Wait, this is an EMU, right? Yeah, this is an EMU. It's even a Japanese style EMU. To some extent, kind of. It's kind of a hybrid. So Japanese EMUs power all the axles, but each axle separately. So it's lots of 300 kilowatt things. Europeans power an entire car at something like 2 megawatts. This is intermediate. This is 1 megawatt. But I'm actually surprised that they went back to. For some reason, they thought that they were going to stay with. I for some reason thought that they were going to stay with the EMU. Oh, this is the one that they're doing right now, I guess. Yeah, okay. That's what I thought. Yeah, yeah. So they're about to transition to it, but they haven't opened them yet. Okay. Yep. So I said I'm gonna finish at 9, and it is 9:13. So this is gonna be a more than 3 hour video. Are there any final questions? And and you might be able to kind of see the background slowly get darker because the sun is setting as we speak, and they don't set this up with artificial lighting this time of day, unlike when I started doing this back when it was very early spring and was already almost sunset at this point. Thanks for watching, um, and thanks for the questions. They were very interesting. I'm gonna give. I always like giving it 1 more minute because there's a little bit of a lag. Thanks, Larry. Um, there's always a little bit of a lag, so I don't like saying, "Are there any questions?" No. Um, like I don't want this from the perspective of the viewer to be like this kind of movie trope about when, let's say, if a teacher or a parent really doesn't like a certain child, they say, "Are there any questions?" This child who's again really disliked by the teacher or parent for constantly asking questions. Yes, I have raises their hand. Does anyone have a question? This person keeps trying to say, I do. Does anyone have a question? Okay, no. Thank you. But if it's been, what is it, 2 minutes and nobody's asking, then I think we're good. Um, so thanks for sticking around, guys, and I will see you, and I will see you once again in a week for another video about some topic about public transportation and urbanism to be determined. So, ciao, ciao.